meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 125 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates that even Minister Duclos recognizes as the mighty Yogo, the only committee that matters. Very quickly, just regarding your earpieces, as always, keep them away from the microphone, especially when not in use. There is a card provided for every MP. Please read that and follow along so that we are protecting our very valued interpreters. We'll start with Minister Duclos for 5 minutes, but just very quickly, colleagues, today we have the minister. We'll go through our rounds. Second minister, Canada Post will be with us for the last hour and a half, hour 45, and then we have to get to the estimates votes before we finish up. So I'm hoping we can get to the estimate votes at about 8:10. We'll kind of see where we are in the rounds. We'll start with Minister Duclos for 5 minutes. Welcome back, Minister. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm very happy to be with you, and thank you for your invitation to me. I would like to say that I want to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the traditional land of unceded land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. On behalf of Public Services and Procurement Canada and Shared Services Canada, I'm pleased to discuss with Ariane Reza, Deputy Minister, and Scott Jones, Matthew Tapscott as well from Shared Services Canada as well. And we are going also to be speaking about affordable funding. We have Linda Adrick, who is the Vice Chair and Controller for the agency that I have just named. PSPC is seeking a net increase of 448.6 million, bringing the total opening net budget to approximately 4.8 billion for 2024-25. And of that amount, more than 3.3 billion will be spent on property and infrastructure activities, including major rehabilitation projects across Canada. The rest of the funds, with respect to PSPC, the rest of the funds will support important areas of SPPC, wide-ranging mandate, and that represents the some that I mentioned beforehand. As you know, we support a large number of clients with central agencies, partners, and clients to build an efficient and modern information technology framework with defined and optimized processes.
Including continued efforts to modernize procurement with a focus on simplifying processes and increasing support to small and medium-sized enterprises. As this committee is well aware, the government is also reducing spending on professional services by 15%, and that work is well underway. For the remaining contracts in this area, we are improving oversight and integrity. And that is why PSPC has made important process changes to ensure decision-making and controls associated with professional service contracts uphold the highest procurement standards. Earlier this year, with the President of the Treasury Board, I announced a series of new actions to strengthen the government's procurement and integrity regimes. I'm pleased to update the committee that PSPC's new Office of Supplier Integrity and Compliance will formally come into effect in just 2 days, that is on May the 31st. That will allow us to better respond to supplier misconduct and unethical behavior. Monsieur le Président, la prestation des services.
Mr. Chair, we also have procurement. It is one of our priorities, particularly with respect to the pay challenges that are being faced by the public services, and we want to prepare a system for the next generation. Our public servants should be paid correctly and on time. At PSPC, we want to have the digital services necessary to deliver programs and benefits to all Canadians. And we will continue with SSC to continue to provide technological services that are necessary.
Priorities is to continue to support our government's response to the housing crisis. We've already taken action to accelerate the process of turning federal lands and buildings into housing. And with our new Public Lands for Homes plan announced in Budget 2024, we have the potential to unlock hundreds of thousands of new affordable homes. PSPC is leading on this plan and work is already well underway. The plan includes identifying and even acquiring underutilized public lands and leasing them out to ensure they are set aside for the building of the affordable homes that Canadians need. Mr. Chair, we also continue to work in close collaboration with key partners to implement the Canadian Dental Care Plan, which is already making oral health care more affordable and more accessible to middle-class and lower-income Canadians. Depuis le lancement du régime canadien de soins dentaires,
Not long ago, PSPC led a competitive process to select the third-party administrator for the Canadian Dental Care Plan. And beyond the figures, we now also have our senior citizens who will also be able to benefit from dental services that they have awaited for far too long. These are services that we offer all Canadians, and we are now happy to answer all your questions.
Mrs. Block for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I will welcome the Minister and just ask the following question. Minister Duclos, under this Prime Minister and this Liberal government, and more specifically yourself as the former President of the Treasury Board and now the Minister for Public Services and Procurement, we have seen an increase in wasteful spending and corruption in the number of billions of dollars and dozens of investigations, including the RCMP. In fact, your own departmental plan has noted fraud and other wrongdoing remains a key risk for your department. How much more contracting fraud has been discovered in your department?
You are noting quite well that this department is key to making the lives of Canadians better and more affordable. That is a focus of this department, PSPC and shared services. As we do that, as you also note, we need to make sure that the process and the processes are rigorous. And if there were to be fraud and wrongdoing, that it would be first identified and then punished in the proper way.
Thank you. Has the RCMP interviewed any government officials in your department?
Well, you need to ask the RCMP for reliable information. Obviously, the RCMP doesn't respond to political interference and pressure. So the right people to ask the question would be to ask the RCMP.
But you are aware of the investigations that have been undertaken by the RCMP, is that correct?
We are all aware of such investigations, and we obviously fully support whatever RCMP efforts need to be supported, and we are there to help their difficult job.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned the creation of a new office to address supplier misconduct. What about misconduct within your own department?
Et c'est une excellente question, et si je peux résumer rapidement.
That's an excellent question. This new office is going to extend the volume of offenses or issues that will be dealt with. For example, corruption, the funding of terrorism, human trafficking, electoral violations, and they will be dealt with even better than in the past.
Specifically about issues within your own department.
So it is indeed an office that will be able to look into the department's activities, but also beyond, and also in collaboration with other governments and other countries, which is something that is not possible at this time.
Thank you. Are you aware that deputy ministers across different departments have suspended public servants who worked on ArriveCan that are not agreeing with their narrative?
And that is an important question to ask to those departments, ministers, and deputy ministers, as we all follow the news. We are indeed aware of such events.
Is there any responsibility on the part of your office to weigh in on these matters or to pay particular attention to what is happening across the public service?
all departments, all ministers, all deputy ministers have the same obligation that if there is misconduct to be found within their public service, they are obligated, and we expect them to do that, obligated to look into the matters and to punish in whatever appropriate way that ill behavior.
Thank you. We have seen Canada Post running higher deficits year after year as they struggle to make strategic changes to address the changes in the market. Yet Canada Post has not had its corporate plan approved since 2019, prior to the pandemic. What has kept your government from approving a new corporate plan for Canada Post?
Canada Post has the responsibility, and it's a difficult one, to deliver services across our country. Its purpose is a service-first purpose. It needs to be fairly treating all Canadians, regardless of where they live, in remote and rural areas in particular, something which other organizations and private corporations in particular sometimes are unwilling or unable to do. And we understand that the demand for mail has been falling over the last 20 years, falling by approximately 50%. They also serve more addresses, about 3 million more addresses in the last 20 years. So that is putting pressure, financial pressure on them.
Thank
and we're
you.
obviously working with them to make sure that they keep meeting their heavy responsibilities while doing this in a financially sustainable manner.
It has also been reported many times that the government is looking to move on from the Phoenix pay system and that trials are being run at certain departments with the new system, Next Gen, I believe. Would you be able to provide this committee with the names of the companies who bid on the contracts for the new system, how they were ranked, and which departments they are currently running trials in?
So let me proceed in quick two phases. First, the objective of all of that, which is precisely and obviously the objective of serving public servants, paying them on time and accurately as they serve Canadians through their jobs. As we do that, we also need to consider the next path, which is, as you noted, Next Gen.
Minister, I appreciate the objective. I think we're all aware of what you're trying to accomplish by moving to a new system, but I'm asking if you would provide me with the names of the companies who bid on the contracts for the new pay system, how they were ranked, and which departments they are currently running trials in.
We will do that
to
with great
interrupt, Chair
pleasure.
Minister. We are out of time. Perhaps you can provide that in writing to the committee. Ms. Atwin, please go ahead for 6.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues and for the minister and your team for being with us this afternoon. You know, and it wasn't so long ago that you came to visit me in the riding of Fredericton, and we went to the Senior Stepping Stone Center, and we had a great conversation around dental care. And of course, I know that according to the 2024-25 departmental plan, the Canadian Dental Care Plan will be a key area of focus for Public Services and Procurement Canada. So I'll take my time to kind of delve into this really important program for Canadians. And so specifically, we were speaking to seniors, and many of them had questions and concerns, and you were able to answer those questions for them and really bring assurances. Because in my home province of New Brunswick, 57% over the age of 65 do not have dental insurance. So could you explain how the Canadian Dental Care Plan will address the needs of vulnerable populations, such as low-income children, seniors, and people with disabilities?
And that's a wonderful question and a wonderful visit, which we were able to do together. And we heard directly from seniors something which other members of parliament may not have heard recently, and certainly not the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, who claimed at the local radio in my region just a few days ago that this dental care plan didn't exist. He repeated that several times. He was asked about whether he would scrap it, and he said, I can't talk about it because it doesn't exist. Well, there are 2 million people registered in the dental care plan across Canada, and many of them in your own riding. More than 100,000 vulnerable seniors have been able to get care since the 1st of May. That is remarkable. The reason we don't speak about this is that it's going really well. And obviously, there are some on the other side of the house who would prefer not to speak about it and not to see that it's working, and some pretending that it doesn't exist. But for seniors in your riding, Jenica, it makes a great deal of difference. Some of those seniors that we met told us that they hadn't been able to visit a dentist for years or a denturist because they didn't have the money to do that. Now that is leading, unfortunately, in too many cases, to worse and much worse health outcomes. The longer these seniors have been waiting, the more difficult, the more costly, and the more painful it is for dentists, hygienists, and denturists to treat their oral health situation. So it's been remarkable to visit those seniors with you, Jenica. I applaud your leadership. You were there before the plan was in place. Now, you seniors were listening to you and saying, is it really going to happen? It is happening thanks to your leadership and that of many others.
Having a challenge kind of getting our dentists to sign up. And so this is something we'd certainly like to address. We're hearing, we know that last month, Dr. Matthew Moore, former president of the New Brunswick Dental Association, he told CBC that he'd already taken on a lot of the work of answering patient questions. I think that there seems to be a lot of misinformation out there. We're seeing, many of our colleagues actually talking down the program, which isn't helping, spread the word of what this can actually offer to Canadians across the country. So if you could address, the Dental Association in New Brunswick, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them as far as, encouraging their membership to really get on board with this, I think, transformative program?
Well, I'd love to be a New Brunswick MP. Unfortunately, I can only be a Quebec MP, so I can talk to you about what I hear in my riding. I've been visiting dentists for the last few weeks. They are surprised how well it goes. It's simple, it's fast, they get paid in less than 2 days, sometimes less than 24 hours. Now, their queries are quickly answered. They are seeing patients that they should have been seeing many months and many years ago. But fortunately, these patients now come to their offices. In Quebec, more than 60%, more than 60% of dental providers have now registered. We know it's more challenging in other parts of Canada, including in New Brunswick. So I would invite all New Brunswick dentists and hygienists and denturists. They're all good, well-intentioned, but unfortunately, they've suffered from some of the disinformation that conservative MPs in particular have been spreading over the last few weeks.
I'm really glad you mentioned the dental hygienists as well, because they've really been champions for us in New Brunswick around this program. And so shout out to the incredible independent dental hygienists out there. And Minister, you also mentioned a bit about the health benefits of regular access to dental care, but I'm sure there's also economic benefits to this piece as well. Could you be more specific about how this can impact individual lives?
Well, health is healthcare, and healthcare is health, and dental health, oral healthcare is absolutely essential when it comes to looking after your global health. So experts, hygienists, dentists in particular have pointed to the fact that good oral health reduces the risk of diabetes, for instance, reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, reduces the risk of generalized infections, reduces the risk of people not being able, and increases the risk of cancer as well, and many other things that are connected to the mouth. Now, our mouth is obviously connected closely to the rest of our body. So investing in oral health care is a good way to improve overall health. And what we're also finding is that by providing better oral health to Canadians, we avoid having those Canadians having to go to the emergency department, so having an emergency surgery, which would cost a fortune to the healthcare system and make the lives of everyone a lot worse off.
So it's absolutely part of preventative healthcare, and it certainly could potentially reduce costs, I think, down the line as well for our government. I've got 15 seconds left, but I'll just thank you again, Minister, for being here with us today. Thank you.
Point of order. I wonder if the minister can just clarify, did he just testify that the mouth is connected to the rest of the body?
It's not a point of order. Thanks. We'll go to Mrs. Vignola for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duclos, for being here with us. Madame Reza, Mr. Scott, Madame Rager. My first question will deal with the new society. The corporation has been set up to change buildings into housing units. That is something, and it has happened in the past that the government has contested the taxes with respect to certain areas, certain territories. And I'm giving you the example of Chelsea, where people would have to pay several $100s more per year for where they live. My question is this: these buildings that you're going to be transforming into social housing units, who will be involved in paying for that? The federal government or Canadian businesses? Well, that is an excellent question. The question alludes to the fact that in budget 2024, more will be made aware for Canada Lands, for national defense, and for PSPC in particular, in addition to what traditionally came from the sale of these lands. We want to make it simpler. We want to make it quicker and more useful on the long term. It is something that we can do. We can take federal buildings and we can put them at the disposal of not-for-profit organizations. And these businesses will be able to have access to these buildings, to the land, and at lesser cost. Yes, but my question was this, and I will repeat it. The regulations and the laws that are existent, whose laws will apply? Will it be federal legislation, or will it be Quebec's laws and the laws of the other provinces for this type of housing? Are you going to apply that? And further, will municipal taxes be paid on these buildings that will be either built or converted? So who's going to pay the difference if the federal government decides again to contest legislation? So to which jurisdiction goes the priority? Well, we have provincial, we have municipal and federal legislation. There are also issues of urban modernization and adjustments, municipalities, and the residents may well have partnerships. So really, it's going to be a combination of things that will ensure that the legislation will be respected, as is the case in circumstances where there are buildings that are federally regulated, but there are other buildings where they are regulated otherwise. Well, then, can you tell me that there will be no disagreement about the goods and services that will be built on federal lands through this plan, as is the case in Chelsea right now? Or can you guarantee that municipalities in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada will have the power over this type of building? Well, I think in Canada and in Quebec in particular, uh, people are feeling the effects of the housing crisis, and they seek affordable housing for families that need it. What we have to count on is good partnerships, goodwill, and the partnership of all Canadians and Quebecers. We want to see a cooperation, and everybody will work collaboratively. Well, in Chelsea, collaboration has led to the courts and the court system. But that's all I have to say about that. Let's hope for cooperation and collaboration in the near future. There are funds that have been sought in the main estimates to improve the Translation Bureau, the capacity for translation. We have new tools, GC Lingua, which has been acquired, and that is certainly good news because we are short of interpreters. But at the same time, I wonder, will there be interpreters who will be losing their jobs because of GC Lingua?
Madame Vignola.
Thank you, Julie, Madame Vignola, for your question. We know the issues and we know the needs in terms of translation and simultaneous interpretation. Interpreters know what is at stake, and we are very sensitive to that. This exercise of translation and interpretation is certainly essential. But the $35 million is necessary. There will be bursaries that will be given out to train new people in translation and interpretation. And we want to make our interpreters' lives more safer certainly. And we want them to be able to serve as long as possible at no risk, given the nature of their work.
Correct, please. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us today. I appreciated your enthusiasm for dental care, and in your response to Ms. Atwin, you very correctly stated that the mouth is part of the body. And I would add, more importantly, I know Mr. Genuis took great umbrage to that statement, but I think what you're trying to get at is that oral health is integral to people's overall health, and that when people's teeth are in bad shape, eventually they can end up in our hospitals, in our emergency health system, and they can see a whole suite of really challenging situations. So I want to thank you for your support, but I have to say, a little bit confused, because in 2021, Jack Harris, my former colleague, a wonderful MP from St. John's East, brought forward a motion that, in the opinion of the House, the government should establish a federal dental care plan as soon as possible for Canadian families earning less than $90,000 per year who are not covered by a dental care plan. And I'm looking here at the voting record, and there's a Mr. Duclos who voted nay to that motion. And like, I'm all for people having a change of heart and seeing the light and, enjoying the road to Damascus. I'm just wondering what changed your mind.
Well, let me start with the partial joke of MP Genuis, and that's fine. No, we can have fun, but it's a serious matter for many seniors when it comes to feeling the pain that comes with not having good oral health.
Absolutely.
So yes, we can make jokes about that, but it's at the end, it's something that is very important to millions of Canadians, 9 million in total by the time this is fully implemented in 2025. So we'll see whether we keep joking or smiling about this particular matter. Now, the second thing is that, yes, there were priorities that have been adjusted over time. And one of them is investing in dental care. And your partnership at the NDP was crucial. Without you, we couldn't do that, because we are in a minority government and the Conservatives are against, and the Bloc too. So the only way to make that real, and it's now real, again, contrary to the view of Pierre Poilievre, who said that this is not in existence, it's there. It makes the lives of seniors change. So because of your leadership and partnership, we've been able to do that. And we'll keep putting in our priorities the things that matter to Canadians as we move forward.
It's appreciated by the millions of Canadians who are going to benefit. I think the reason I brought up Mr. Harris's motion was that was in 2021. And in the 3 years that have passed between that motion being tabled and voted on and being defeated, and the eventual creation of the dental care program we now see rolling out, thousands of Canadian seniors and people with disabilities and young people needed dental care very much. And so, while we appreciate that your party has finally recognized the incredible benefits of public dental care, man, it would have been nice to have it start 3 years earlier and have all those people get the care that they need. I'll shift, Mr. Chair, how many more minutes do I have? I know the time flies. 2.5 minutes. Shift to the issue of Canada Post. And of course, since your last visit to committee, we've seen the annual report from Canada Post and the fact that the corporation has lost over $750 million. I believe that's the greatest deficit in the corporation's history. And at the same time, we see in rural Canada some real challenges around the loss of rural post offices. You and I have spoken about this. This is affecting communities right across the country. Now, every year, you provide a letter of expectation as minister to the head of Canada Post, which is an arm's length Crown corporation. In those letters of expectation, has the minister responsible ever expressed specific concern about the closure of rural post offices in this country?
So since you spoke about the things we are doing for Canadians, since 2021, we've put into place universal daycare in Canada.
No, but Minister,
And-
just
and-
not. It's a serious question. It's a very specific question
Yes,
about the letter of expectation. I don't want to hear
So
an answer about child.
and I know you, Taylor. I know you how good and focused
serious I am
and
about this,
engaged you
yes.
are. So it is not that if we haven't done anything since 2021.
No, I didn't
In
say that
many
in my
many
question.
cases, you were supporting or even leading on some of these files. So I want to acknowledge that, Taylor,
I
because
appreciate it.
you're a progressive, you're an engaged and credible person. Now on post offices and the rural moratorium in particular,
It's the letter of expectation
and the
specifically.
letter of expectations. Yes, every year there is a letter of expectations that states not only the expectations, but the objectives which we believe that Canada Post should be striving for. Now we understand that Canada Post is independent and sometimes need to, as we discussed last time, to adjust to situations that either were not predictable or that just were not controllable, such as retirement and deaths and fires and all of these things that sometimes occur and make it difficult for Canada Post to maintain rural post offices in particular. But that's not only the expectation that we are setting for them, but also the
Mr. Chair, can I know my time is running out. It's probably
Your time
run
is
out.
out.
Can I just finish with a couple of words, which is that since your government put a moratorium in place in 1994, we've lost over 500 rural post offices. And my question was a very specific one, and I'm disappointed that you did not provide a clear answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Backrack. Mr. Brock, for 5 minutes, please.
Sure. Minister, over 2 months ago, March the 20th, you appeared at committee and you and Minister Anon announced to Canadians that collectively you discovered through a mix of tips and advanced data analytics, 3 subcontractors who were engaged in fraudulent billing over 36 separate government departments, totaling close to $5 million. All 3 had been referred to the RCMP. Miss Reza, during one of her last appearances, actually gave us the names of those 3 subcontractors. They weren't companies per se, but rather individuals. So my question to you is, I know there's been an ongoing dialogue between yourself, sir, your department, and the RCMP. Have the RCMP confirmed that those 3 individuals have been criminally charged? Yes or no?
Well, we need to distinguish 2 things. First, the work of my department, and second, the work of the RCMP. As you noted and summarized quite well, on March the 20th, it was made public that there were
Sir,
investigations.
that's fine. Has the RCMP confirmed with you or a member of your department that the 3 referrals have resulted in criminal charges? Yes or no?
So as I was going to say, as for what pertains to the RCMP, it's for the RCMP to answer.
So you don't know the answer.
So I wouldn't be able to
You don't
speak
know the
credibly on behalf
That's
of
fine.
the RCMP.
You indicated back then this was only the first wave of what you expected to be a series of discoveries. You indicated at that time there were 5 to 10 further cases being examined. Of those 5 to 10, have there been referrals made to the RCMP?
And that is because, as you noted, on March the 20th, there was also another piece of good news, which is there was the creation.
I don't
of
care
the
about the good
Office of
news, sir. Of the 5 to 10 that you identified over 2 months ago, have any of those companies been referred to the RCMP? Yes or no, sir?
As I've said, RCMP matters or
Sir,
RCMP matters.
this is a decision you or your ministry would make to the RCMP. The RCMP on their own don't initiate the investigation based on your internal review. They rely upon your referral. Again, for the third time, sir, of the 5 to 10 cases, have any of those been referred to the RCMP?
So again, the March 20th announcement was important. You listened to it carefully, obviously, and you understood it well. As you also noted, there are investigations on a number of others, the estimate being between 5 and 10. I am not privy to those conversations. My job cannot make me politically involved in that type
This
of
is not
work
a
because that would be
political decision,
political
sir.
interference.
Sir, you indicated that your department had identified 5 to 10 other cases of suspected fraudulent criminal activity. This is not a hard question to answer, sir. Surely the investigation that was started over 2 months ago must be finished by now. So the question is very simple, sir. I'll ask it for the fourth time. Of those 5 to 10 investigations that your department started, has any of those been referred to the RCMP?
When that information is known, it will be made public by the RCMP, presumably,
Can
or
you
by
tell
the
us, sir,
integrity.
with respect, please?
No, no,
This is not question period,
my-
sir. This is committee. This is where we actually get answers from government officials. The
And-
answer, sir, is yes or no. Did you refer, or a member of your department refer any of those 5 to 10 cases to the RCMP?
And the answer, when it comes, and if it comes,
Why
will come
can't you
from
answer the
independent
question?
officers and not
Minister,
political representatives.
Minister, why can't you answer
No,
the
no, no.
question?
Ms. MP Brock, you wouldn't want a politician, including yourself, mingle
Sir, you had
with
no problem
matters of
identifying
integrity
3.
and investigation.
sir,
That
with
wouldn't be
respect.
appropriate.
Sorry,
You know
one
this
moment,
really
please.
well.
Both of you have a point of order. I'd stop the clock.
Would appreciate if my colleague, MP Brock, allowed the minister to finish. Thank you.
Okay,
Minister,
sorry, let me,
On- on-
please. We've brought this up many times. It's not a point of order. We do allow members to have the time. Mr. Brock's been very clear with his questions. I think he and members of the committee deserve a very clear answer. Minister, go ahead. I've restarted. Sorry,
I'll
Mr.
ask-
Brock.
I'm gonna ask the
re-
question,
I'm
Chair.
restarting the clock. Go ahead.
Minister, you had no difficulty, you and Minister Anand had no difficulty identifying 3 subcontractors that you referred to the RCMP. But now you have great difficulty sharing with parliamentarians, sharing with Canadians of the 5 to 10 companies that were under review 2.5 months ago, whether any of them were referred to the RCMP. What are you hiding?
And that's because the independent officers in my department do their job with no political interference. When I am aware, when I will become aware at some point, I suppose, of the results of these investigations, we will be able to share those results.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for rejoining us here at OGO once again. We always appreciate you coming here and providing your insights and your testimony. The number one issue that I hear about when I speak with young people in my community, students at the University of Windsor, students at St. Clair College, young people that are getting their apprentices completed, is housing. And I hear the same thing when I talk to seniors as well, too. Housing is their number one priority. The previous Conservative government, when it was in power, and when the current leader of the opposition, Conservative leader of the opposition, was the Minister of Housing at the time, that government lost 800,000 low-cost rental apartments. They also eliminated any federal involvement in the co-op housing program. And they pulled the federal government out of the business of housing. And they're coming back right now with plans. Their plan, if you look at it, delve into it, you see that they want to actually add additional taxes on the construction of rental housing. And they also want to withhold critical infrastructure dollars for municipalities to be able to build additional housing. Now, we've got a different plan. The Liberal government has a different plan on this side. We want to build 3.9 million homes in the next number of years. And a critical aspect of getting those 3.9 million homes built is converting surplus federal lands into housing. It's a critical piece, and it's part of the Public Lands for Homes plan. I was really excited to see in this budget that the Department of National Defense is working with the Canada Lands Company and other partners to dispose of 14 surplus properties, including one in my hometown in Windsor, which is the HMCS Hunter building right downtown. It's a perfect opportunity to build housing, revitalize our downtown core, because it's important. It's been sitting vacant for years. I know that you're leading the rapid review of the federal lands portfolio. So I wanted to ask, can you share with this committee some of the measures that are being undertaken and led by your department in this rapid review?
Thank you, Irek. And let me start perhaps with your initial start, which is that Pierre Poilievre, not only did he lose 800,000 low rental units, but he also created only 6 affordable housing units during his entire mandate and across the entire country. Now 6, that's 1 affordable home per 6 million Canadians. So we can imagine how difficult it is for people in my province to hear him insult Quebec municipalities by calling them incompetent when they are building thousands and thousands of affordable homes with the support of the federal government. So that's my little partisan bit, but it's important to provide a better context, as you have done successfully over the last minutes. Now, more importantly, perhaps, is where are we going? We're building on the work we've done since 2015. Just to give you an example, we spoke briefly about the Canada Lands Company a moment ago. The Canada Lands Company built approximately 2,400 affordable homes in the last 25 years, half of them since 2015, and it will be double that number in the next 5 years. So we see how accelerated the work of making lands and buildings owned by the federal government available for building affordable homes. I say affordable homes because the alternative is to sell those lands and buildings to the highest bidder and not worry at all about whether the use of those lands and buildings will lead to affordable housing units. No, those federal land and buildings need to be used for affordable homes, as well as for homes that will meet other criteria, socio-environmental criteria, such as being close to services, being close to transit, serving the needs of the most needy communities, green homes. So these are also objectives which you wouldn't be able to achieve if you sold all of that federal property to the highest bidder only. So we take a different route, and with your leadership in your riding, with the DND property that you mentioned, with Canada Post properties elsewhere, with other properties from other departments, and with the properties currently owned by PSPC, we can do a lot of good for middle class and lower income families.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will let my colleagues take the time necessary to put their earpieces on. We've seen, well, we spoke earlier about Next Gen, the announcement that was made by Dave Force. Can you confirm that it is the same thing? And why was there this name change? Or are they 2 totally different things? So one was the test and one would be the official application? Yes, that's a very good question, Madame Vignola. I want to avoid any confusion. In French, we say a progen for next gen. And yes, this is something we absolutely have to do because Phoenix is not a solution for the future. We have to consider this. So the system that was tested over a variety of departments to date seems to work, but before going forward, there's a great deal of work that remains to be done. Thank you. I sincerely hope that we're not going to have a Phoenix 2.0 here. that would be another disaster. And with our jewel of heritage, the port of Quebec, well, not the port, but the uh, bridge, which is a new acquisition, the Quebec Bridge, and we are talking now about a refit for it of $1 billion. But a few years ago, the figure was 400 million. So over how many years are you going to make this investment? And also, are we going to see this refit affected for the Quebec Bridge to bring it back to its former splendor? When you think back to the Jacques Cartier Bridge, you remember the enormous difference between the two because the Pont du Québec is a UNESCO gem.
Respond in writing to the committee to the question.
Oui, ben, malheureusement, s'il n'y a pas de temps, là, on va.
Yes, if we don't have enough time, I'll do that.
Mrs. Vignola brought up, but you commented about testing the next gen. Would you be able to provide to the committee what departments you're testing on, what the error rate is, and how many employees per department are part of the test, if you could?
Yes, and that's in line with what MP Block asked earlier.
We'll go to Mr. Backrack, please, for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, your comments about ensuring that public properties are used for the community good, particularly affordable housing, made me think of a public property, a federally owned property in Sandspit on Haida Gwaii, where Transport Canada owns the Sandspit Inn. It's been sitting empty for a number of years now, and the community would very much like that property to be dedicated to community use, either as a hotel as it was formerly or as affordable housing. And my understanding of the divestiture process is that eventually properties like that go up for bids from whomever. And I'm wondering if you could lay out how the process for divesting of public properties is going to prioritize community uses, especially housing. How has since your government has brought forward this strategy for creating affordable housing, how have you changed the processes for divestment and development of public lands and properties in order to ensure that it doesn't get sold to simply the highest bidder? I think that's probably clearly articulated enough for you to provide some kind of answer.
Yeah, it's very well articulated. And we call that the triple P. So it's the places, the partners, and the purpose. So the places, we first need to have an inventory of them. Fortunately, there is already a partial inventory ready and available. But in the next few months, there will be a lot more available, not only on existing surplus properties, but on properties that could be surplus if we were able to, use office space differently, for instance, or recognize that there are properties that are not used to their full potential. The partners, very important. Now we need to work with community partners, not-for-profit housing partners, private developers, if they can be, can help speed up, obviously, the construction and perhaps the use of those properties, and most importantly, the purposes for which those properties would be used. So yes, the key purpose is to build affordable homes. These homes have to be affordable for middle class and lower income Canadians. Other purposes, including socio-environmental purposes, as we know, we need to protect the environment. So
I'm afraid I have to cut you off there.
Oh,
We're out
sorry.
of time. We'll have Mr. Dennis, then Mr. Sousa to finish us off.
Thank you, Chair. This committee is reviewing a list of contracts given as part of the Indigenous Procurement Program. Some of these companies do seem to follow the GC Strategies model. That is, they are very small firms based in private homes in Ottawa, not on reserves, but in Ottawa, who advertise a specialty in government contracts management. In other words, they're in the business of simply getting contracts and subcontracting. Do you think that the government should be contracting out to firms who use the GC Strategies model?
Et ça nous ramène aux discussions.
That brings us back to the discussion that we had some months ago. And as you know, very important measures have been put in place since that time, including
I've got 5 minutes. You know, you're not answering the question. Do you think that government should be contracting out to firms who use the who use the GC Strategies model? I'm not talking about ArriveCan. I'm talking about the model where a company just receives contracts and subcontracts without actually working on the project. Do you think that the government should contract to companies who use this model?
Well, I think the ArriveCan model and the GC Strategies model has been well discussed and much investigated by all sorts of groups and committees and organizations, and we have learned important lessons. Those lessons have been
I'll just
shared.
give you one more chance to answer the question. It's a yes or no question. The record will show whether you answered it or not. Do you think that the government of Canada should contract to companies who simply receive contracts and subcontract? Should the government contract to companies who use this model?
Well, I've just answered the important fact, as you point out, that so-called model, which you just described, is a model that has been heavily criticized by the Auditor General and other groups, including this particular committee. And obviously, those lessons have been well understood, and many of those recommendations have already been implemented over the last
Okay, but
few months.
the question still hasn't been answered, but I have to move on. There's a particular problem here if the recipients of all or most of those subcontracts are non-Indigenous. If you have a small, officially Indigenous firm that is simply acting as a broker between the federal government and non-Indigenous business, then they're masking the fact that actually Indigenous peoples, Indigenous businesses are not getting the final business at the end of the day. Is there an expectation or a requirement that some percentage of subcontracts also go to Indigenous firms?
Well, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to make sure that Indigenous businesses have access to the procurement opportunity that other Canadians also have. And that's why.
Right,
not
at the
only do we have a target
subcontracting
of
level
5
as well?
Not only do we have a target of 5%, but we're moving towards that target. And in some of the departments, we have exceeded that target.
Okay, sorry,
already.
Minister, it's a specific question. I'd like you to answer it. Is there an expectation at the subcontracting level that some percentage, when a contract goes to an Indigenous business that's acting primarily as a broker, is there an expectation that a certain percentage of the subcontracts go to Indigenous businesses?
There are rules and regulations and expectations and targets.
Okay, so what's that percentage then?
Indigenous businesses have their fair share of
What is
procurement
the
opportunities.
percentage required at the subcontract level?
So as you note, and as you will know, I suppose the target is 5% of Indigenous businesses having access to procurement contracts. That's a minimum. This is not the
Minister,
ceiling.
you're not answering the question. The question is about subcontracts. So if a contract goes to an Indigenous business as part of that 5%, and that Indigenous business then subcontracts to someone else, what percentage of those subcontracts should be Indigenous? Because if 100% of those subcontracts are non-Indigenous, maybe there's a problem there. So of that 5% for the subcontracts, what percentage must, if any, must be Indigenous?
So that is exactly one of the important things that the department needs to do in collaboration with other departments, because PSPC is not the only department. So
just the number, what
multiple
percentage?
levels, including not only who does a job, but who owns the company, the impact in the communities, where those contracts take place.
Minister, simple question. I'm running out of time. What percentage?
Well, I'm just trying to explain the context.
I'm not looking for an explanation. I'm looking for a number.
And if you like,
and I'm just going to say, Minister, the committee ordered information on subcontracts, and almost none were provided. The information we got from the vast majority of departments is that they're not even tracking. They're not even tracking on subcontracts. A final question. There are over 600 Indigenous nations in this country. Do you think it would be a problem if a single company were getting, say, more than 5% of the total amount allocated for Indigenous procurement?
Brief answer, please, Minister. Very brief.
So there are about 600 communities in Canada, Indigenous communities, about 70 Indigenous First Nations, and we work with all of them to make sure that they have access to the proper services and the proper procurement opportunities.
Chair, the minister didn't answer the question, so I wonder if it could be posed to him again. Maybe there was a problem in transportation.
We are out of time. Perhaps you can get back to us with a real answer in writing, Minister.
If more is needed, we'll provide more.
What would be too much for a single company?
Genois, I'm afraid we have to move on because we do have other ministers waiting. Mr. Sousa for 5, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. And I know that you've done a lot of deliberations, a lot of work in terms of adopting some of the recommendations made by the Auditor General, by the Procurement and the Ombudsman Officer relative to the issues around procurement, and certainly a long-held practice that's been had by the Conservative government prior in terms of contracting and subcontracting in matters regarding intellectual or IT, and as well as building a property. You get a property manager, he subcontracts out the various services to get it built. And it's not different than what we've done in a number of applications here. And I know through your deliberations, you've done a lot of work to try to ensure that we support transparency and accountability in those measures, and be that Indigenous members of the community. I know you're trying to advocate for small business, so we have greater use of procurement and to enable Canadian companies to benefit from that. That's a statement I make on my part, and you can certainly elaborate on it, but I'm actually rather concerned about, not concerned, actually excited about development in my community. Canada Lands owns a property in Port Street in a waterfront. It's meant for mixed use, for development, park, affordable housing. The community is very excited about it. It's been actually rather stagnant for years and years. And the fact that Canada Lands is stepping up through your leadership to try to look at redevelopment of that property, I'm very excited about it. But it's also because in budget 2024, we've announced an overhaul to the mandate of Canada Lands and its ability to take on some more development. And I would ask if you could elaborate and explain some of these reforms regarding Canada Lands mandate.
Thank you, Charles. And I'm so glad, and we're so glad to hear that Canada Land Company is already leading and partnering in your community. As you know, there's going to be even more doing so in other places across Canada because of not only a renewed, but a much enhanced mandate in budget 2024 with tools that will support indeed your community, such as I mentioned earlier, leasing tools. Now, as opposed to going through what is sometimes too long and too complicated, which is to dispose of properties by selling them to the highest bidder. Why don't we lease those properties over a long time to community developers, not-for-profit housing developers, to municipalities, to other groups that will then commit to build affordable homes in the long term, affordability being key, not only in the short term, but also in the longer term. Using that to support the efforts of cooperatives, public housing. So it's in addition to leasing, Canada Lands Company would also have the ability to develop the projects themselves. And I should also add, I was going to forget that in budget 2024, there is a $500 million fund so that the federal government can acquire public lands which are not currently owned by the federal government, could be owned by municipal or provincial governments. We buy those pieces of land and we make them, or buildings, and we make them available to the community through, again, possibly lease agreements with lots of economic and socio-environmental positive outcomes.
And the reforms that are now being made to enhance Canada Lands, can you elaborate a little bit more on how that then extends or promotes affordable housing and promotion of housing throughout the country?
So the key word here is accelerating. Over the last 25 years, Canada Lands has built about 2,400 affordable homes. In the last 8 years, 1,200, so a lot more than in the previous 16 years. And in the next 5 years, it will be more than 5,000 affordable homes that Canada Lands Company will be able to build in partnership with other partners. So it's a lot of ambition, but the good news is that there are means to do that through your leadership and the leadership of other MPs of all political parties in this room and elsewhere. Now we have, as the Prime Minister said today at question period, we have a housing crisis like we had at post-Second World War. We had one when we had the boomers population trying to find homes in the 1960s. We have a crisis that we can solve, and we will be solving it with a partnership of many and the support of the Canada Lands Company.
Looks like I have a bit more time. Do you want to respond to the recommendation that you've promoted regarding contracting and the procurement process of recently? Some of the recommendations that you've applied. It's for the benefit of
Oh,
this
well,
committee.
I'm
Oh,
needing
you
a lot
don't
more
have
time
You
because I
don't
have about,
time for that.
I know you
Minister.
have.
I have about,
We do
for-
need to turn over to the next meeting.
They don't want to hear the results. There you go.
You're welcome to provide them in writing if you're able to, Minister. We do have a motion has passed in this committee that we request any questions asked are going to provide back to us to do so within a 3-week period. Minister, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to suspend for a few minutes as we switch over our witnesses. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair.
I'd like to acknowledge that the lands on which we are gathered are part of the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Et je suis accompagnée aujourd'hui
And I'm accompanied today by officials from my department to give you an overview of the main estimates 2024-2025. Canadians expect of their government that it is transparent, and Canadians do have the right to know how their money is being spent. Through our financial reports, our government has committed to spending the taxpayers' money transparently, effectively, and prudently. I would like to now turn to certain highlights in the main estimates 2024-2025, which was brought in February 29 last.
$9 billion in budgetary spending, with $191.6 billion to be voted on. Non-budgetary expenditures of $1.2 billion are also presented, Mr. Chair. Ce financement permettra
This funding will allow the government to fulfill a number of programs and services, as well as transfer payments for other levels of government, organizations, and persons.
amounts proposed for organizations in these main estimates include $28.8 billion for national defense investments, including support for Ukraine and training and equipment for the Canadian Armed Forces. $20.9 billion for Indigenous services, for programs for Indigenous communities and settlements, $8.4 billion for Health Canada, including funding to expand the Canadian Dental Care Plan, $5.6 billion for CMHC for much needed housing infrastructure. J'aimerais également souligner
I would also like to point out that these main estimates represent further information about our initiative to refocus government spending, which was first announced in the 2023 budget. I'm very happy to be able to say that the main estimates represent $10.5 billion over the next 3 years, which will be redirected to departmental budgets.
also priorities of Canadians and focuses on health and housing and puts in place an economy and an economic plan for our country. This is part of the savings announced in budget 2023 and 2024, and the fall economic statement last year also outlined our plans for refocus budget government spending. The total also includes the refocusing of $500 million that we reported in the supplementary estimates tabled last fall. What I mean by this, Mr. Chair, is what we are doing is looking across government for areas in which we can reduce our spending in certain areas like third-party contracting, like executive travel, and refocusing that money towards our government's priorities. Over the next 4 years, based on historical rates of attrition, this will achieve the remaining savings of $4.2 billion over 4 years, starting in 25-26, and $1.3 billion ongoing towards the refocusing government spending target. TBS officials, some of whom are here with me today, are working on the methodology to determine these savings, and more details on the implementation of Phase 2 will be available soon. I do want to be clear. This goal of this exercise is about spending smarter so that we're investing in areas and programs that matter most to Canadians and the country. And our government will continue to provide Canadians and MPs on the details of this initiative through the departmental plans and departmental results reports, Mr. Chair. I know you have read through many of those copiously over the years. In conclusion, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak about these main estimates. My officials and I would now be more than pleased to take your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for being on time, and we'll mention that to Minister Duclos. He should learn from you on how to do the opening on time. We'll start with Mrs. Kusi, please, for 6 minutes.
when you tabled the main estimates, you stated your governance ministers are acting like all other Canadians and examining their own pocketbooks. That was your quote. Do you believe that Canadians have examined their pocketbooks and have decided that they can spend more the way you have? Is that really what you're thinking? That they are examining their pocketbooks and are making the decision to spend more and can spend more as you are? I don't think they are. What would you like to tell Canadians on that, please?
Well, Mr. Chair, I do appreciate the question. And the intention of that point was to say that this is a time where we need to be prudent with our spending. And at the Treasury Board of Canada, our role is to oversee government spending and to ensure that we undertake a risk analysis at all times of that spending.
Thank you.
And
Being
so
prudent
when
with
we
your
table the
spending,
main
Minister,
estimates, that is the
how do you
goal.
think the younger generation looks right now at you and your government with a $39.8 billion deficit in the current budget? Do you really think they believe that you are being prudent with a $39.8 billion deficit that not only this generation, but the next generation is going to have to pay off? Do you really think that's being prudent, Minister?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7 and a AAA credit rating. And at the same time, we are maintaining that fiscal prudent track. And we are also providing supports to Canadians through dental care, through pharmacare, contraception for women so that they can make their own choices about
Minister,
their
Canadians,
bodies.
when they're
Mr.
standing
Chair.
in line at the food
And-
bank, don't care about the debt to GDP ratio. They don't care about that. They just care that their tummies are empty and that they want food on the table to feed their families.
Unlike the Conservative
No,
government
Minister,
before
the
us.
government is currently
Mr.
spending
Chair,
more
point-
on
point
debt
of order.
servicing costs than they
Sorry,
are in health
point of
transfer
order.
payments.
Sorry,
I'm
Mr.
just
Chair.
trying to-
See, Minister, sorry, there's a point of order. I'll stop the
Sorry.
clock. Mr.
Trying to
Kuzmirchuk?
respond to the question.
Mr. Chair, I just want us to take into consideration our translators and the
I
fact
will,
that
that's not a point of order, but I
no,
will
point
let
of
you
order.
know.
It
No.
is a point of order.
Sorry, Mr.
because,
Kuzmirchuk, when
Mr. Chair,
the translators have an issue, they'll advise the clerk, and the clerk will advise me, and we will interrupt. I appreciate your point.
I'm just
but we
worried
don't-
about their health and
Thank you.
well-being, and I
have
see
ruled Mr.
and I see the
Kuzmirchuk, we're
MP
gonna go back
raising.
to,
I see my MP colleague raising her voice,
okay.
and I'm just simply
Okay,
asking that we
I've
respect the
ruled Mr.
translators.
Kuzmirchuk. I appreciate what we're trying to
Okay.
do. I've made it very clear. I made it clear to one of your colleagues earlier. I appreciate we don't continue in interruptions.
I appreciate you
Mrs.
taking that into
Kusi will
consideration.
continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, in the main estimates, it stated $46.5 billion was required simply to service our debt. This is in addition to this year's $39.8 billion deficit. Now, in the supplementary estimates, you have come back and asked for another $1.9 billion, as though this $1.9 billion was an oversight to service the national debt. Why were these numbers not properly accounted for in your main estimates just a few months ago? And what can we as Canadians expect in the future in terms of further amounts that have not been accounted for as a result of your bad accounting?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, on the issue of poverty, our government, unlike the Conservative government prior to us, we've reduced poverty in this country by 22%. On the issue of the debt, I will say that our government has made a decision to ensure that we have strong fiscal markers like a AAA credit rating, like the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7, while supporting Canadians, while ensuring that we have affordable housing supports in place, while ensuring that we have dental care available for our population.
Then, Minister,
and
why
pharmacare as
are
well,
1 in
Mr.
4
Chair.
Canadians skipping meals? Again, what the 1 in 4 Canadians that are skipping meals really don't take comfort in these statistics that you are saying here today or in the House of Commons when you are responding in question period. Minister, in your last announcement on fraud, as a result of the Arrive scam scandal, with the Canadian procurement system, you stated that the 3 individuals you found committing $5 million worth of fraud in contracting were only the first tranche of individuals. Are you ready today to tell Canadians the number of individuals who you have determined to be committing fraud and you have now turned over to the RCMP? Can you give that number, please?
That issue is within PSPC, but I will say that all fraud is unacceptable and that the RCMP has charge over those cases. And if it determines to lay charges, we will be supporting the RCMP in every investigation it undertakes, just as we have done
Okay,
in the
so you don't
past.
have a number for us today.
It is
Can you
not
tell
within my
us-
purview.
Can you tell us the total? It is within your purview, and especially given that you were previously the Minister of Procurement, you should have an idea as to these numbers. If you can't tell us how many individuals have been turned over to the RCMP as a result of fraud, can you at least please tell Canadians how much they have been scammed out of, how much fraudulent money has been paid out as a result of
Actually,
of this
Mr.
fraud?
Chair, 3 individuals to my knowledge have been turned over to the RCMP. And secondly, Mr. Chair, what I am doing at Treasury Board, and this is within my purview actually, is to ensure that we have the policies and the governance in place to ensure that we have better management control over
I know, but
these
it's not-
types of incidents.
My last
Today,
question
I released
is,
a new manager
you said
side
at the
with
last meeting
mandatory
that you would
obligations
have
on
that
directors.
you would recruit the money from the Arrive Scam scandal. Can you report to Canadians that you have gotten that $60 million back for the Arrive Scam
I can
scandal?
report to Canadians that as soon as the RCMP report comes back on the Arrive can issue,
So that's
we
a
will
no.
follow
You
the
promised the last time I saw
Mr.
you
Chair,
that you would
point
get
of-
the
point of
money back
order.
for
I mean,
Canadians.
this is-
That's what you said, and you are coming
Excuse
in
me,
today
Mr.
to
Chair,
say
am I
you're
able
back.
to
Sorry, let me
respond
interrupt. We have
to
another
that
point of
witness's
order.
question?
Sorry, we have a point of order from Mr. Kuzmierczak. We have to go ahead,
Mr. Chair, I'm just
Kuzmierczak.
asking my colleagues to please respect again our interpreters
Okay,
and
Mr.
their health and
Kuzmierczak, if you're
safety.
gonna,
This is
I've made
important.
it clear, and I appreciate what we're trying to do,
This-
but I've made it clear that if there's an issue with interpreters, they will contact our clerk.
Okay,
I would ask you to please stop your interruptions.
it's not an interruption.
It
I'm
is,
actually
Mr.
looking after
Kuzmierczak,
the
and if you're gonna
interpreters
continue
on this
this,
committee. Mr.
time
Chair-
will be taken
Mr.
away from
Chair,
others.
if
I've
you
made
won't
my
look after
ruling
it,
very
I
clearly.
certainly will.
Mr. Kuzmierczak, please. I've stated before, and I've told one of your colleagues before this,
Okay.
if there's an issue, they will advise the clerk the proper way. They will not advise you. They will not advise your other members. They'll
Mhm.
advise the clerk. So I ask you, please stop
Okay.
with such interruptions. Mrs. Kusi,
I
Minister, I understand.
respond?
Miss,
Can
I
I
understand,
respond at
Mrs.
all,
Kusi
ever,
and
here?
Minister. I understand what you're saying. If you please allow a question and an answer, you have 40 seconds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you tell Canadians today clearly, as you promised them the last time that we spoke in a committee environment, that you have recouped the $60+ million because, as the Auditor General indicated, it is a minimum of 60 million. You have recouped those funds for Canadians as you promised you would.
Mr. Speaker, there is an ongoing investigation. Any wrongdoing will be taken into account. I stand by my comments that the government will seek to recover taxpayers' money that was spent
That's a no, Mr. Chair.
inappropriately.
That's
We
clearly
are
a no.
waiting for the RCMB investigation to
That's a
conclude.
no.
Thank you
That is
very much,
not a no. That is, we are waiting for the RCMP
Thank you,
investigation.
Minister. We're going to go
conclude,
to Mr.
Mr.
Baines. I'm
Chair.
sure you'll have an
Thank you.
opportunity to answer during Mr. Baines this time. Go ahead, Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, I want to give the minister an opportunity to finish her answer. I know you were interrupted a number of times there, so feel free to please answer on the important work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was interrupted a number of times and I feel it was inappropriate as well. I'm here to answer questions in good faith and I would appreciate being given the opportunity by colleagues across the House to provide the answers that I'm here to give. Now, there is an ongoing investigation by the RCMP. That investigation has not concluded. We, as a government, have stated that we will comply with the recommendations from the RCMP. We will also ensure that anybody who abused taxpayers' money will face consequences, and the government will seek to recover taxpayers' money that was spent inappropriately. That is our commitment, and certainly at Treasury Board, I take the purview and the prudent spending of our government extremely seriously, as my colleagues do at the Treasury Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I really appreciate the work that you are doing. And I'm very encouraged by the spending review that you've administered. I look forward to the upcoming updates on this. And my first question The 2024-25 main estimates signal a $2.3 billion reallocation of funding in your refocused government spending initiative. That's up from a $500 million reallocation in the previous fiscal year. So what impact do these massive funding reallocations have on the delivery of important services that Canadians rely on?
Is to ensure that vulnerable Canadians are able to have supports. And in budget 2023, we made a commitment to refocus government spending to ensure not only prudent fiscal management of taxpayer dollars, but that we were able also to utilize that funding to provide supports for Canadians. The main estimates reported on the planned reallocations of over $10.5 billion over the next 3 years as a result of the Refocusing Government Spending Initiative was tabled in the main estimates at the end of February. And I will say that the Refocused Government Spending Initiative was one that all ministers participated in, looking at their portfolios to see how they can refocus both money spent on operating costs as well as grants and contributions towards the government's priorities. The Refocused Government Spending Initiative is an initiative that is a commitment to prudence while continuing to support Canadians by creating growth and opportunities for all. You saw that commitment in budget 2024 with supports for affordable housing, for a national school food program, for dental care, as well as additional childcare through ECE supports. Those are the types of initiatives and social programs that we believe are important. And if the opposition cares about poverty, then I would think they would support initiatives like a national school food program, like the Canada Child Benefit, and like $10 a day childcare, which ensures that families have support to get by.
Thank you. And with respect to that, are there any negative impacts on Canadian taxpayers maybe could face due to the refocused spending? And should parliamentarians choose to vote against these important main estimates?
As I said, Mr. Chair, the Refocused Government Spending Initiative does not cut the supports for Canadians. In fact, what it does is to take a look across government at spending where spending might not be necessary, such as in the area of executive travel and third-party contracting, to say this money could be better spent, is able to gain greater utility when used for another purpose. That is the way in which we are using this exercise. And I will say the PBO officer commenting on the first phase of refocusing government spending opined that government services would not be cut as a result of those measures.
I'm going to shift a little bit of focus because I think the threat is real around cybersecurity, and I think we all know that, and the ever evolving threat of cyber attacks. In fact, in my city of Richmond, BC, London Drugs is headquartered there, and they recently faced a major cyber attack, and I wanted to ask a little bit about that strategy, the cybersecurity strategy, and how you're working to ensure that the Government of Canada's enterprise networks are safe.
So cyber is an area that I take very seriously, especially given my time at the Department of National Defense, where I had oversight of the communications security establishment. I will say that the Treasury Board has a leadership role in setting the direction for government IT modernization and driving momentum on the whole of government solution for cyber. Last week, I actually announced the first ever Government of Canada cyber strategy for our government. So rather than having individual departments and ministries utilize their own cyber strategy, we have now a whole of government approach that will be run out of the Treasury Board and Shared Services Canada together with the CSE.
Thank you,
We
Mr.
are implementing
Sorry,
this.
Minister, we are out. Perhaps next round, you
Sure.
can finish
Thank
off
you so
or
much.
get back
Thank
to
you
us
for
in
the
writing.
question.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. Madam Minister, you are the president of the Treasury Board, and the Treasury Board Secretariat is responsible for the Official Languages Act services in French, and I thank you for that. Some public servants rather have some difficulty in using their mother tongue, and they may even answer in certain situations where there is interpretation, give answers in French to Anglophones. That is wonderful. But we see that there's a certain amount of slowness in the regulations. The Commissioner of Official Languages brought this to our attention. So when can we expect to have publication of the regulations? Thank you very much, Chair, Madam, for this question. I would start by saying that it is important, if not crucial, to have an environment where we can work in both official languages. It is certainly crucial for me as a minister to be able to do so throughout the country. In all the departments, everybody should be able to work in either or both official languages. You asked when. When are we going to have this framework available for the public service? It is important. We are going to have an announcement on that matter, and I will be sharing that announcement with you in coming weeks. Secondly, we are also going to provide a training, to publish a training guide in the coming months as well. Well, thank you very much. Spring will end on June 21st. So next month, it will be next month, around that date. Okay, just at the end of the spring. I took a look at the main estimates, and I saw for Treasury Board Secretariat that it has moved from 44 million to 50 billion in 2024, 2025. Well, that's more than a giant step. You could. It seems to me that you are jumping the Atlantic and the Pacific with this huge increase. So, what is behind that request for this increase? First of all, Chair, I would like to perhaps clarify that it's a matter of continuing to support the most vulnerable in our society and to have essential programs like dental care and pharmacare. But it is also a matter of providing affordable housing. With that, I would like to invite my colleague here if she would like to add something to your answer. Thank you. Yes, are you talking about the 5.1 billion central funds? Well, these are core funding. So there are always changes year over year. I don't know if you're comparing the same things with respect to the previous years. Well, last year it was $3.4 billion, and now it has taken this huge jump. If I make a comparison with 2022, 2023, where it was a matter of $44 million dollars. excuse me, I must say, and I apologize to the interpreters. I'm just flabbergasted by this enormous increase for the Treasury Board Secretariat. For overview, 44 million in 2022, 2023. But so we're talking, we're moving from 44 million to more than 2 billion. And now this year it's 5 billion. So how can you justify, what type of oversight is necessary to justify this type of jump? I'm going to have to come back to you with a written response. These are core funding numbers, but I think it would be more appropriate for me to answer in writing.
10 seconds.
Je reviendrai.
All right, then I will come back. And again, I thank you for giving me time, despite Mr. Bacharach.
Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. Not long after you were given this new role, you sent a letter to your ministerial colleagues asking them to identify areas to cut within their respective departmental budgets in an effort, and I'm reading from a Global News article, in an effort to reduce spending by 14.1 billion between now and 2028. Why 14.1 billion? It's a very specific number. What's it based on?
This was the first ever refocused government spending initiative that our government has done since 2015. And we wanted to be prudent, as other G7 economies are, with an exercise of this nature. We wanted to differentiate ourselves from the Harper-Drapp program, which was much more severe and involved serious cuts to services and programs and the public service. And so we chose a prudent amount to begin the first phase of the Refocused Government Spending Initiative. But it's not just $15.8 billion. It is also that amount over a 5-year period, and then $4.8 billion every year thereafter. So it's actually a continuous process of ensuring that we are reducing our spending in some areas and refocusing it on others. And then finally, there's a phase 2 of the Refocusing Government Spending Initiative that was enunciated in Budget 2024.
So I appreciate all that, Minister, and I think you've laid out your rationale for it, but you didn't answer the question. The number in this article is 14.1 billion. The number you gave is 15.8 billion. They're both very specific numbers, and I'm wondering what they're based on. Like, arguably, you could provide the direction to find cost savings, and this assumes that there's some sort of slop in departmental budgets. I don't think anyone would argue that there isn't, but why specific numbers? 14.1 billion, 15.8 billion. What is that based on? Is it based on some kind of preliminary evaluation? This is out of honest curiosity.
Yeah, I will say that we needed to begin with a baseline for an initiative that our government had not undertaken at that time. And Annie va ajouter quelque chose aussi.
So based on the budget announcement, it was based on discretionary spending. So it was 3% for operating discretionary spending and 15% for professional services and travel. So if you take those 2 percentages, you apply to the main estimates, you're going to get those specific numbers that you just referred to.
Okay, thank you. That's a very clear answer, and I would encourage you to pass on your answering ability to the minister that we had prior, because he seemed to really struggle with answering simple questions that obviously have answers, and I appreciate that. Now, the CBSA border officers voted 96% in favor of a strike. They've been without a contract for 2 years. They provide really important services, as everyone around the table knows. And after the strike vote, the Canadian government said in a statement that a strike was unnecessary, but they also said that the government was ready to return to the table, quote, at any time. I guess the question is, has negotiating resumed, and why did it take a strike vote for the government to offer to return to the table?
Actually, we have already reached collective agreements with 80% of public servants comprising 17 bargaining units. And so we look forward to being at the table with the CBSA at the beginning of next week, actually. There's an independent mediator that will be overseeing the negotiations. There is the Public Interest Commission report, which is available publicly now, and it contains independent recommendations from that mediator, and those will form the basis of the negotiations that we will undertake at the table with these very important public servants. You'll recall the essential work that the border folks do, the CBSA folks do, and we're very grateful for that work. I will say 90% of CBSA employees are performing essential services for Canadians. So we want to reach a deal that is fair for employees and fair for Canadian taxpayers, and we will look forward to doing that at the bargaining table.
Thank you, Minister. My last question, I know there's a lot of concern and interest in the return to work directive that your government has provided to public sector workers. And I think, you know, one of the curious things about this is what the core rationale for that directive is. We see that most of the departmental reports have indicated that productivity has either gone up or at least remained level for public sector workers working at home. What was the core rationale for providing that directive?
Just a quick answer, please.
The decision of the public service that was made relating to hybrid was made as a result of its view that it is fully within their ability to do that under existing policy without being a breach of collective agreement, because this stands outside of the collective agreement. In terms of an explanation of the policy, because it was not a political decision, I will turn to the public servants to
Actually,
answer that question.
I'm afraid we're out of time. We can either follow it up on Monday when the officials are back with us, or unless the minister wishes to stay past her hour.
It's very kind
Mrs.
of you,
Goosey,
Mr.
go
Chair.
ahead,
I will
please.
defer to the officials on Monday.
Mrs. Goosey for 5, please.
Minister, the CBSA border officers voted last week to approve a strike due to the lack of a contract for the last 2 years. Their demands include wage parity, protection from management retaliation, access to telework, and protection from CBSA's obsessive reliance on contracting out, very similar to your own government and your own department, Minister. Now, you have outlined briefly the process which you are undertaking, but if you are not successful, as your predecessor was not successful, and in fact, I think her legacy, unfortunately, is built on that lack of success in reaching these negotiations in a reasonable amount of time successfully. If you are not successful, can you share with Canadians the total amount that this will have an effect on the economy? How many in the billions will this affect the Canadian economy if you are not successful? Can you tell Canadians that, please?
Actually, it is premature for us to put precise figures on the table. We are still in the midst of ensuring that we reach a fair and reasonable agreement with the CBSA. We are committed to working with bargaining agents to reach an agreement that is fair and reasonable, and we will do so at the table. And I would be more than happy to return to this committee and speak to the particular numbers, but at this time, it is premature for me to put numbers on the table in the type of question that I've just received.
I don't think it is premature, Minister, because if we look at the costs of the port strikes in both Vancouver, and Montreal last year, it was $10 billion. $10 billion that had the effect on this economy, especially at a time when your government is in out of control spending, when we need this economy to function so bad. Your government failed, your predecessor failed in getting these negotiations resolved in a timely manner, which cost the economy $10 billion. And of course, was also a hit to our tax revenues. So are you not concerned that we might see these numbers again? Should you not be successful? Do you have any comments for Canadians regarding that?
Of course, I have comments about our expenditures. I am the president of the Treasury Board, after all, and I will say that I will at all times have oversight and prudent oversight of government spending. What I mean by ensuring that we have a negotiation that occurs at the table is just that. The demands that are going to be the subject of those negotiations will yield, if all goes well, a fair and reasonable
Minister, I don't want to talk about
agreement
hypotheticals,
for
please,
the
and
border
I
services
wouldn't be so
workers.
excited to share your title with a $39.8 billion deficit, Minister. I also want to ask as well, relative that you've stated that your department is happy to return to the bargaining table to negotiate in good faith.
Yes, we are.
But it's been 2 years without a contract. So why are you only just trying now to complete this negotiation? Like I said, your predecessor failed. You're in the process of failing. What are you going to do to ensure that you get this across
I
the finish
actually
line?
do not think that we are in the process of failing. We are in the process of seeking a deal that is fair and reasonable to Government of Canada employees and to the Canadian taxpayers. And I would not think that hypotheticals of the sort that are being posed in this question would be useful in seeking to reach a fair and reasonable deal. And
Well,
I will
as the
also
official
say,
opposition, Madam President, we look at results. Now, in August
and
2023, you
hypotheticals.
were excited to announce that you were going to find $50.4 billion in savings across all government departments over the next 5 years. However, in budget 2024, more than $52.9 billion in new spending over the next 5 years was announced. This new spending is now more than 3.5 times as much as you announced in savings in August. So how has this initiative done anything to show fiscal restraint with you, as you have said, the president of the Treasury Board, as with you being that, and prove to Canadians that your government can responsibly handle money?
Well, I would take a look at the external markers that indicate fiscal prudence, Mr. Chair. A AAA credit rating is actually an independent
Minister,
assessment
these
of
are cold comfort. This is
Mr.
cold
Chair,
comfort
am
for
I going to be
Canadians.
able to
And
respond to these
if
questions?
you will not
Mr.
listen to
Chair?
the Prime Minister's office regarding your leadership campaign, I hope you will at least listen to Canadians. Thank you very much.
I would really like to be able to respond to questions, Mr. Chair. It's
Yeah, no, I
very
appreciate that. I think it'll
unprofessional
be,
to interrupt me when I'm actually just trying to
We-
respond.
we're out of time, unfortunately. But luckily, unfortunately, the next up is Mr. Jouari from the
Unbelievable.
Liberals, and I think perhaps you'll have an opportunity to respond. I assume
Unbelievable.
during his time. Mr. Jouari, go ahead,
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, officials, welcome to the committee. And Madam Minister, please take as much time as you want to be able to respond. I think it is important, and I have questions around the same line of holding the government accountable, but I'm sure we'll notice a different tone. We
Oh,
can
no, go
ask
ahead.
tough questions in a very respectable way, and I ask my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Minister. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
I simply wanted to respond by saying that independent credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor's, for example, have consistently rated our economy and our government's work on the economy with a AAA credit rating. It is not a nothing. It is actually an assessment of the fiscal health of our economy. And so to denigrate the work of those third-party analysts of our economy is simply to misunderstand the importance of that credit rating. And I will further say that those are economic markers that indicate the fiscal health of a country. At the same time, what we as a government have chosen to do is actually to respond to poverty, is actually to respond to homelessness, is actually to respond to the need in educational institutions to support researchers, masters and doctoral students with supports to feed the pipeline of brilliance, of the AI economy, of the digital economy. And so there's a clear choice that is being made here between the plan of our government in budget 2024 and the absence of a plan by the opposition, where they simply criticize with no actual alternative on the table.
Thank you for that clarification. So now, Madam Minister, in budget 2024-2025 main estimate for the TBS, I saw that you're asking $9.3 billion in voted expenditure. And when I did a little bit of digging, I realized that's the fifth highest of any federal department. Can you please share the rationale behind this high degree of spending in your department? And if you can explain what initiatives actually these spending are being focused on and what. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. These are values that we care deeply about, in particular, creating a diverse and equitable and accessible and inclusive workforce. I'll highlight the action plan for Black public servants that I announced in February, which provides mental health supports for Black public servants, as well as supports for career development, especially at the Canadian School of Public Service. In addition, supporting health and safety through the Public Service Healthcare Plan, strengthening and modernizing the public service through HR to Pay and enhancing the work environment, and reinforcing the values and ethics of the public service, which are also goals of our government and implemented by Treasury Board. I will also say, comme j'ai déjà mentionné, que nous,
As I have said already, that we continue to promote and protect both official languages.
good faith. As I said, we've already reached collective agreements with 17 bargaining units representing 80% of public servants, and we will look forward to doing so with the remainder because it is important to negotiate in good faith at the bargaining table. Thank you.
Focus spending increase now to some refocus government or cost saving, as I would call it. Madam Minister, in your opening remarks, or in responses, you talked about the phase 1 and phase 2. And with 30 seconds of my time left, can you talk about the priority areas for the second phase of the free focus government spending that you'll be focusing on? Thank you.
It's like 20 seconds left now.
So the methodology is currently being undertaken. I will say that we had cooperation and participation by all ministers. The initiative was about examining our budgets, and we have to find means to strengthen our spending on priorities, and reallocation of funds from other areas is absolutely necessary. Also, it's not about cutting services that Canadians rely on. We need to ensure that we support the priorities that I've outlined already today. We are examining phase 2, and we will share more details in the future.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Vignola, then Mr. Bachrach. I have to keep exactly to the 2.5, 2.5, 5, and 5 in order to get the minister out at a decent time. Please go ahead, Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to ask you a question about the passage of Bill C-290 to protect people who disclose misdeeds. So I'm going back to this issue And there's a budget that was attached to a working party, a working group. It was set up in 2022, was it not? And if I'm correct, what is the result? Is that budget sufficient? And what are the expenditures attached to this working group? The Chair, I would like to have more details about this particular group, this whistleblowers group, and perhaps what group is my colleague referring to? In the 2024-25 Treasury Board Secretary, it says it will continue to support the working group of people who are public servants and who are whistleblowers. This group has been set up, I believe, in 2022, if I am correct. What has the group been doing? What have they been charged with?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. That was before that I became minister. Could I look into it and give you the answer in writing after the fact? I will do so in writing because I have to look into the situation with that group. But I would also like to say,
to whistleblower protections. We did support the private members bill of the bloc when it came forward. And so I'll just say as a general matter that I'm very supportive of the issue, but on the specific question and the group's activities, I will come back to you with the expenditures as well.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you so much, Chair. Do I still have a few instants left?
Boudreau is back with us Monday. Perhaps she can present us with that information on Monday. Please be quick, Mrs. Vignola. Sorry.
Merci beaucoup. Selon le plan.
Thank you. With respect to 2024-2025's budget, the Treasury Board Secretariat has 90% of its high volume work that has been able to demonstrate service standards. So what are service standards? It seems to me that service standards, when you set them out, they should be followed implicitly without any exception entirely. So with this amount that of the volume that has been attained, fine, but why is it not 100%? Can you give me the answer in writing as well, please?
Or perhaps on Monday. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Minister, I think a lot of Canadians were pretty shocked to discover that this individual, David Yeo, was working for the federal government, for DND, while at the same time securing millions of dollars in government contracts. And Treasury Board has promised a new risk framework to ensure that departments are managing themselves accordingly and avoiding situations like this where no conflict of interest disclosure was provided and it wasn't flagged by the department or dealt with properly. Can you talk a little bit about how this new risk framework, if it had been in place, would have caught this situation and dealt with it appropriately?
So actually today I published a new manager's guide, and this is building on the announcement that Jean-Yves Duclos and I made on March 20th. And that new manager's guide makes it mandatory for managers that they've looked at all alternatives within the public service. And also there's a requirement to disclose conflicts of interest before a contract is signed. The manager has to attest that no conflict exists. And so essentially that is the difference. There's the requirement to do so in writing, and it has to be done at the time of contracting. But you will recall that with regard to the individual that you mentioned, that disclosure was made and caught.
The disclosure was made, but I think it took like 150 days after he was hired by the department, when the requirement, the department's own requirement, is that it be disclosed, I believe, within 30 days. Is that not the case?
As soon as it was caught, the individual was terminated. I was not actually at Defense at the time, but I know Francis is conducting the horizontal audit across government, so he will be able to speak as the Comptroller General more specifically to that case.
Very, very, very briefly, please.
So the requirement as it relates to contracting with the government of Canada when you are an employee requires that the actual authority be given by the deputy minister prior to the actual work, the actual work to be conducted. So it's not a 30 days after, it's actually a requirement prior to it.
Under the new rules, correct?
Under the current rules.
Thanks very much. Mr. Genuis, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Minister, you oversee government spending and related rules. Can you assure this committee that you've never used government resources as part of a leadership campaign?
I most definitely can confirm that I have never done that and would never do that. And I actually am surprised that you would ask the question, but I have never done that.
Thank you, Minister. I think people understand it's an important question. Have any directives been issued to ensure that other ministers are following the rules as well?
Ministers and public servants are expected to follow all rules, period.
But no directives have been issued specifically on that?
It is important for everyone to follow the policies of the Government of Canada, as well as the conflict of interest policies that all MPs are required to follow.
Thank you, Minister. I think that's clear on the record in terms of what was asked and what was answered. You know, we're here reviewing Indigenous contracting as well. Documents have been received that reveal that a small number of nominally Indigenous firms were able to act as brokers between the federal government and other potentially non-Indigenous companies, simply getting contracts and subcontracting. This allows the contracts to fit into an Indigenous contracting quota, even though Indigenous people do not actually benefit because the subcontractors may be all or mostly non-Indigenous. These companies are essentially using the Dalian or GC Strategies model. I want to ask you, when a company gets a contract under an Indigenous set-aside, is there an expectation or a requirement that some percentage of subcontracts also go to Indigenous firms?
Indigenous Services Canada manages the list of Indigenous businesses that are qualified Indigenous contracting companies, but PSPC manages this overall. And I will say that departments are responsible for making a request to IST to conduct a post-award audit, and the audit has to be requested when there's any suspicion at all that the requirements of the applicable policy haven't been met through delivery, and Indigenous Services Canada.
Can I just clarify my
required
question, Minister? And I'd love to hear your response
the
on this.
audit.
Do the requirements include that a certain percentage of subcontracts from an Indigenous contracting situation, that a certain percentage of the subcontracts go to Indigenous companies? And are the subcontractors tracked in any way?
Right now, the percentage is 33%. In other words, the contractor's delivery of goods or services and monitoring the contractor's compliance with the 33% Indigenous content requirement for contracting companies.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was looking for. And I appreciate that, the 1/3 requirement there. Is that tracked? Because the committee asked for subcontracting information, and we received, in almost all cases, zero information about subcontracts. So I'm a bit mystified about how the government would know if that requirement is being met, if subcontracting is not being tracked in any case.
I actually just want to clarify my answer, and then I want to add one thing. It's 33% for the contract that would be verified in the post audit that ISC does. And on your question about subcontractors, I actually think it is a good point, and I think that we should do continual work to be able to track the suppliers in the subcontracting process.
Yeah, Minister, I really appreciate that comment. That's the first time I've ever questioned a minister and had an acknowledgement of an important point, because I think there is a gap. We received no information on subcontracts. We didn't get an answer from the previous minister. So I hope we'll have agreement from this committee, from you, to refine that process so we're actually tracking subcontracting information. I want to ask one more question on this. There seem to be instances where a few small number of companies are getting an outsized proportion of overall contracts. How much would you say is too much for a single company to get of that total share of Indigenous procurement? Keeping in mind that there's over 600 Indigenous communities in this country, how much would be too much for a single company to get of that total?
I do not have the ability to respond to that question without an overall amount of the actual contract. But I will say that the principle that we operate under is fair, open, and transparent competition. And the 5% floor for Indigenous contracts that we established as a government was meant to ensure that Indigenous suppliers have access to government contracts.
Thank you very much. Ms. Atwin, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to address really quickly. I see that Mr. Generous is particularly interested in the Indigenous business procurement strategy, which is great, but I would caution you to be really careful with the language that you're using. Nominally Indigenous, I'm not sure where you're going with that. I think Indigenous identity is very complex, and I would just caution you to be careful around that discussion. Minister, systemic racism, bias, and discrimination are issues that everyone has a responsibility to resolve. Across Canada, there's still numerous barriers to entry, retention, or promotion for marginalized groups in places of employment, and statistically speaking, it disproportionately impacts Black Canadians. How is the Treasury Board working to address systemic racism and discrimination in the ranks of the public service? And what benefit does the funding offer to the department in the main estimates offer to the broader public service as well as the department itself?
I have been very pleased that at the Treasury Board of Canada, there is a responsibility to ensure that we're addressing discrimination in the public service. Discrimination is a reality, and we need to do more, and we need to do more faster. So I appreciate the question, and it is a priority that I am taking extremely seriously. We have a restorative engagement program that we are responding to in terms of recommendations that we received from an expert panel. And in fact, I'm building on my work at the Department of National Defense, where we also had a restorative engagement program there. And so part of that is going to ensure that we do whatever possible to address discrimination in the public service. In addition to the restorative engagement program, we have the supports for Black public servants that we have announced in February, including supports for mental health of Black public servants by ensuring that we have Black counselors who are able to assist where needed. And in addition to that, we have the School of Public Service, where we are ensuring that there are professional development and career supports for Black public servants. And I'll say that when I announced those supports for Black public servants, one of our Black public servants in the Government of Canada came to me and said, "My son has now said that he can see himself working in the Government of Canada." And I will say that there's way more work to do, but it does give you hope that things can get better when you hear comments like that.
Indeed, for sure. Thank you, Minister. I want to ask now about HR and pay systems of the public service. As we all know, there's been much controversy surrounding the Phoenix pay system and the various issues that our public servants face through its implementation. It certainly affected many of my constituents. I'm in the capital city of New Brunswick, many federal departments, CFB Gagetown as well. And so could you discuss how your department is working to ensure that Canada's public service receives adequate pay services, as well as any new measures that are being taken regarding the public services human resources system?
Sure. I am definitely committed to making sure that federal public servants are paid properly and on time for their work. And it is something that I have been focused on since my days at Public Services and Procurement Canada. The government and a number of public service unions have reached agreements to compensate current and former employees who were affected by the implementation of the Phoenix pay system in 2016. Those agreements cover general damages from April 2016 to March 2020. All employees covered by the damages agreements have now received their general damages compensation. Also, there's a claims process in place to allow eligible current and former employees to file claims where there are severe damages. I will say that continue to be issues that the government needs to address. We need to resolve outstanding pay issues for public servants. We need to modernize the processes and systems to improve the overall human resources and pay experience for employees. And we will always work with all partners, including bargaining agents, to simplify human resources and pay processes.
Excellent, thank you.
You have enough time to say thanks,
Oh,
basically.
okay. Well, thank you very much, Minister.
And that's all the time I have as well. Minister, witnesses, thanks for being with us.
Thank
We're
you.
going to suspend for about 5 minutes or so to set up our next round of witnesses. We are suspended. Everyone, we are back in session. We'd like to welcome friends from Canada Post, Mr. Edinger. Welcome to OGO. Appreciate you joining us. We'll turn the floor over to you for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. And good evening, Mr. Chair. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Manon Fortin, our Chief Operating Officer on my left, and Randella El-Haj, our Vice President of Finance and our Controller on my right. Thank you so much for having us today, and thank you to the committee for undertaking this very timely study on the Postal Service in Canada's rural and remote communities. Le travail que vous faites.
The work that you do is very important.
Look very much forward to this report. Like so many other businesses, Canada Post must adapt to the dramatic changes in how Canadians live and work and shop, in our case. Our recently released annual report makes it crystal clear that the Postal Service is facing major challenges financially and operationally. My focus is on how we can best meet the needs and expectations of Canadians both now and into the future, with a focus on them, our customers. Canada Post provides a service and a network that Canadians consider essential. We connect all 17.4 million addresses daily in the second largest country in the world. We connect our country and our economy. Canadians depend on us because we deliver everywhere, not just where it would be most profitable for us. Our service can be a lifeline for many Canadians. And for small businesses, it allows them to compete in a market dominated by large multinational e-commerce giants. And for Canadians in rural and remote areas, Canada Post is one of their only delivery options. As the postal system changes, these rural and remote communities cannot get left behind. Nous devons et nous.
We must and we want to be there for them.
By now, you've seen, and we've seen our financial results, so I won't get into all the details. But let me highlight a few of our challenges. Firstly, on letter mail, which used to be our primary revenue source, continues to decline as it does around the world in this advancing digital age. In 2006, each household received an average of 7 letters a week. Last year, it was just 2. At the same time, and going in the opposite direction, a growing population means we deliver to more addresses every year. In fact, 3 million more compared to 2006. More addresses means our delivery costs continue to rise, and year after year, the financial gap between the price of postage and the cost of providing the service widens. We've also seen challenges in parcel delivery. The parcels are the very future of the company, where we've been making critical investments in service and capacity to better compete. Last year, these investments helped us achieve some of our best ever service performance results in our entire history. However, the parcel delivery market has become hyper competitive. We're going head to head, toe to toe against established global players and low-cost new entrants that emerged through the pandemic. As a result, our parcel delivery market share has been cut by more than half since 2019. Mr. Chair, Canadians need a strong postal service, particularly in rural and remote communities. Nous devons nous adapter.
We must adapt quickly to be there for them.
For this important study, let me offer my thoughts on what a future Canada Post could look like. To me, it requires the following. Number one, becoming much more nimble and innovative, focused on the changing needs of our customers. Number two, being able to invest in priority areas such as our network and bringing our legacy systems out of the dark ages, further improving safety for our people and continuing to green our operations. Number three, having a delivery model with the flexibility to offer weekend deliveries, next day deliveries, and other innovative services Canadians want. Number four, making our post office network more small business friendly and an easy to access growth hub for Canada's budding entrepreneurs. And lastly, number five, we need a refreshed regulatory approach, one that provides flexibility to act quickly in today's hyper-competitive parcel market, while providing the appropriate checks and balances in terms of government oversight.
That is my vision for modernizing Canada Post.
Canada Post will continue to be there for all Canadians and Canadian businesses. We will keep working hard to evolve the postal system to reflect how Canadians use our service today, and more importantly, how they're going to use it tomorrow. Significant change is required urgently, and we're prepared and committed to leading this change, working closely with the federal government and our bargaining agents. Canadians expect us to work together in your roles as legislators and ours as management to find workable solutions to evolve and preserve this great national infrastructure. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you and merci.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Mrs. Block, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Ettinger. Welcome here. I think this is our second or third meeting on this study regarding Canada Post, and I'm looking forward to hearing your answers. Sir, can you answer for us what has been the biggest obstacle to Canada Post modernizing over the last 8 years?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Really, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, our delivery costs have been going up substantially, and addresses have been added as we've been growing as a country. So the costs in that are very significant because, as you know, we deliver to every address every day. We're proud of that. We're pleased to do that. But the cost of being everywhere every day is getting higher and higher every day. At the same time, our revenues have been falling in terms of letter mail, our most profitable line of business. So it's put us in a tough position financially in terms of having, adequate funding over the long term to make the kind of changes we need to make to modernize this company. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be more agile. It needs to be more flexible. And when I say flexibility, I mean regulatory, but also in areas of investment, decision making. We're in a category against some of the best competitors in the world, and we have to be moving fast. I'm confident we can compete with them, but it needs to be a different model to do that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. In your opening statements, you used terms like being able to invest and a refreshed regulatory approach. We've been made aware that Canada Post has not had a corporate plan approved since 2019, which is prior to the pandemic. How much damage has been done to Canada Post by the lack of a corporate plan over the last 5 years?
Well, we thank you for that. We've been working very closely with the government on the plan. Our last corporate plan was submitted last fall, in fact, early for 24 to 28, the corporate plan. It outlines the challenges in that in great detail. We've not been able to find alignment to get approval, but we're working with the government on a new plan. We're joint stewards of Canada Post. We're working together to try to find the right solutions. The minister and I have a good working relationship. But right now, the focus is on short-term measures to make sure that we continue to be viable in the next few years in terms of financing, borrowing, and pricing flexibility so that we have the adequate amount of funds to continue to turn around this company.
So with this misalignment that you have between Canada Post and the government of Canada or the minister with whom you are negotiating to get an approved plan, what seems to be the issue, the main issue in that misalignment?
Well, as you know, in the laws that govern Canada Post, we have to operate in a financially self-sustainable manner, which is a good thing to have in place. So we have submitted all of our plans from a business standpoint based on the need to have a long-term financially sustainable company, breaking even or even getting past that, but mainly to break even. But we have not found in that process the alignment that both of us are comfortable with. So again, we're continuing to work hard on it. And in the meantime, we're changing and upgrading and modernizing what's within our control.
Thank you. I represent a very large rural riding in Saskatchewan, and my constituents on a repeated basis have raised the issue of Canada Post's long-term effort to change over addresses to civic addresses for the purposes of delivering the mail. And I know that this is being replicated across the country in rural Canada. Do you have a timeline for when this initiative will be completed? And can you tell us what are the difficulties facing Canada Post in getting this done?
Thank you. And I'm going to pass that over to Manon Fortin, our Chief Operating Officer, to answer that question if I can.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug, and thank you for the question. We are constantly reviewing our network to assess where changes need to be made to improve service to the 17 million addresses, not just urban, but rural and remote communities also. And we have hundreds of civic addressing projects ongoing every year. I'm not familiar with the request from your area,
but I can assure you that we often do it at the request of the community, or we do it because there's growth that we need to deal with, and therefore, or changing demographics, changes in the community. So hundreds of it's not an easy change. It takes a lot of diligence and a lot of work with those who live in the community and the cities as well. So
Thank you
I'd be
very much. I'm
happy
afraid that is
to
our
get more
time.
information.
Sure.
Yeah, and to provide a clear answer on your area specifically.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Kusmirchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for being here today at OGO, and thank you very much for bringing your insights to the work of this committee. I just wanted to start off and saying thank you. This is the first time I had a chance to say thank you for the stamp that was introduced back in January during Black History Month for Marianne Shadd, who is a local icon in Windsor, Essex, and Chatham, Kent area. Marianne Shadd was an abolitionist and was the first woman and the first Black woman in Canada to publish a newspaper, the Provincial Freeman. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that wonderful initiative. Just curious, I wanted to ask, what type of response have you received to that?
Well, thank you for raising that. I appreciate it. And you know, it's one of the really enjoyable parts of my job and our job is to tell the stories of Canadians, a lot of unknown and heroes, Canadian heroes that we don't know about. But that stamp went over very, very well. Part of our annual focus on Black History Month, and there's so many great stories there. And, you know, we really, we do a good job on those, and we really enjoy putting those stories out there and getting the families involved and the communities. It's great for Canada, and if you've never been to a stamp launch, you should come. They're quite emotional and quite positive. So yeah, thank you for the comments.
Wonderful, Mr. Edinger, and you mentioned the word heroes, and I look at the 500 postal workers in Windsor as heroes. They're amazing, and especially during the pandemic, they answered the bell in a huge way. They continue to serve our community with distinction. You know, just to highlight, 2 years ago, a former postal worker, Mr. Phil Lyons, received a prestigious award in our community, which is the Charles E. Brooks Labor Community Service Award, for being a community leader in Windsor, Essex, serving the community. And so they are heroes. Not only do they carry the mail and deliver the mail, not only do they support our community, homeowners, seniors, and others, but they make our communities better. They give back to our community. And you know, in budget 2024, the federal government affirmed that Canada Post will continue to be a service-first organization. I just wanted to ask you, what does service first mean to Canada Post?
Well, thank you for that question. And by the way, before I answer that directly, our employees are absolutely amazing. They are the ambassadors of our brand. They're everywhere, every day. We get tremendous positive feedback. Of course, not all of them are perfect, but they're pretty darn close to it. We really value what they bring to the table. And through COVID, they were amazing. They were on, just to remind everyone, they were on the front lines all through that. They never wavered from their responsibilities to be out there. It was amazing to watch. In terms of service, it's our number 1 through number 10 priority. It is everything to us. It's in law, it's in our mandate, it's in our blood, it's in our purpose, which is a stronger Canada delivered. And our recent investments, where we've tried to control things that are really important to us, we were pleased to open a brand new facility last year in Scarborough, the Albert Jackson Processing Center, named after our first Black letter carrier in Canada back in the late 1800s. That was a huge project led by Manon Fortin, I might say, and led very well. And that is the hub of our e-commerce model across Canada. It is an amazing facility, and our service numbers have shot up quite amazingly since then. The transition, the stabilization has been incredible. Our on-time service performance numbers are the best we've ever seen in our history. And we're going for more. Manon has that as part of her goals for the next year or so. But we're getting to best in class level on service. And it's everything. That's what we're here for, not only in urban areas, but as we talk here in rural and remote areas where it is even more important to those folks. I grew up in a rural area. I've lived in rural areas. I know how important the post offices are, and we're all over that.
Mr. Ettinger, a great response. Definitely agree with what you've stated. How does Canada Post measure service? What are some ways that Canada Post measures service?
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have more KPIs than you can well imagine. It's hard sometimes to keep track of them all, but service is number one, along with safety. Manon and her team, we have dashboards. It's all pretty much real time numbers. We'll get the numbers from the day before, the end of the day, from the last week. And so we measure on-time performance based on when the product was ordered versus when it was delivered, and it's a percentage. So it's a percentage out of 100. So if you're getting to 96, 97, 98% delivered on time, you're in the right range. And of course, you're always wanting to improve, which we do. But that's our goal, to be in that range. And it makes a big difference with our customers. Probably the single most important thing we can do, and I'm talking about major customers as well as consumers, is to be better and better with our service numbers. So we spend a lot of time doing things to enhance those numbers.
Thanks. That is our time. And I appreciate Mr. Kuzmierczak bringing up the point about stamps. John Ware is certainly one of the greatest and coolest Canadians ever from Alberta. I appreciate that. I look forward to the Ogo Chair stamp series as well one day.
I haven't seen that one come across my
but
desk
I appreciate
yet,
the one from Mr. Ware. He is an incredible Albertan. Mrs. Vignola, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Ettinger, Madame Fortin, Madame Ratchet, I'm so happy to see you here today. I'm sorry I touched the mic. I'm sorry. I apologize to the interpreters. I'm going to come back to the nitty gritty here. I am the critic in this area. And my colleagues come to me, what's happening with rural post offices in the North Shore, in Île-de-la-Madeleine, and elsewhere, and other areas where I would say the localities are quite central. But here are a few things that I've been told. Villages that are not merged sometimes have streets that have the same name, the same postal code. And the answer that we are given when there's a complaint from Canada Post, change the name of the street. But you understand that's a problem. It's hard to do. And you know that there have been post offices that have gone up in flames and so on. So I don't know if this is a problem just limited to the post office or just the security in general. And in northern Quebec, there's another problem. There are more people, but not enough postal boxes. So you might have 2 or 3 families sharing the same post office box. And it is a problem in terms of confidentiality for the mail that they get. And for people who live in the north, they don't get service in their mother tongue. That is one of your mandates. That's part of your mandate. And you know, or at least I hope so, you know the problem of transporting medication in the North Shore, the Lower North Shore, and certain areas in Quebec where there are very few, if any, roads. And Île-de-la-Madeleine, where they have to get all types of supplies, even school supplies, sent by post because there's no other way of getting them. Does Canada Post have a solution in mind for this type of problem? How to solve this problem in the future?
Well, thank you very much. There's 2 or 3 questions in there. I appreciate that. And I'm going to pass it over to Manon Fortin. Again, she is responsible for operations. She's very close to it. But I will say before I do that, that again, it's service, service, service. And that is our number one priority. That's where the majority of our resources go. And we've never had better numbers than we have right now. But there are areas that can be better. So Manon, over to you.
Thank you, Doug, et merci à Madame Vignola.
Thank you, Madame Vignola, for your question. I'm just going to say, as said my president, that what we try to do, we strive to offer the best possible service everywhere in Canada, in all corners of Canada. Mail delivered at home, the 3,000 mail trucks that are constantly on Canada's roads, and all the post offices that we have here, half of which are in rural areas. Generally, we do good work. But as you have pointed out, it does happen that there are exceptions. I'm not specifically aware of problems with Saint-Hyacinthe, but I do know that there were other problems in your riding. It does happen that there can be service delays or if, for example, the weather's bad and say an airplane can't take off or land because of that. And we do try to find the solution with the communities that are directly affected by what you outlined. We normally do get the problem solved. Are you talking about Kuchawak? Well, yes, Kuchawak is a good example. As I remember, there are quite a number, 24 or so postal boxes that are required, that they are lacking, and we want to be able to solve this as quickly as possible. We're working on it very hard. Yes, we know throughout the world that there are also there similar problems in countries like ours. But are there international examples that you could cite, that you could follow to improve the postal service here in our own country, in Canada?
Before you start, you have just about 20 seconds, so if you
Okay.
can be brief.
I deal with the CEOs of most of the postal organizations around the world. So we're constantly talking about innovations, what they're doing. One of our biggest challenges in Canada, on a big picture point of view, is it's this vast piece of land that we love and have, and with low population density. So it's really a logistics challenge to connect all that on a daily basis. I think it's kind of amazing what we're able to do in terms of 17.4 million. But as Manon said, we do make mistakes. We need to hear about those, and we will follow up on those accordingly because we want our customers to be happy, particularly in rural and remote areas. So we're committed to that. We've been there all along for the rural areas, and we're going to continue to be there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Edinger, for being here. In 1994, the Liberal government promised that no more rural post offices would close. How many rural post offices has Canada Post closed since that time?
Well, look, it's I joined about 5 years ago, but I know that there are a number that have closed. I will say this, though.
Do you know the number?
Well, I've heard there's 600 that's been closed in the last 30 years. Yes. And so, look, our approach on the post office is we want to keep them. We don't want to close them. We do everything we can to our number one goal is to replace the postmaster. And so we work with the communities, but sometimes we can't find a solution despite everything. And you represent a riding that's rural in northern BC, and I appreciate the challenges of all that. But I'd say, like for example, in the last 5 years, we've been able to replace 90% of the ones that came up where there was something that happened, where the postmaster either was retiring or moving away, or the lease was terminated or whatever. We've been able to fill 90% of those. So there's some that are outside our control that we can't solve. In fact, the charter back in 1994 contemplated that there would be some things that would be outside of our control. But I think, look, we got more post offices than Tim Hortons and McDonald's combined.
But we're losing them all the time. We lost 33 last year. We lost 25 in
Yes.
2022.
Yes.
Now, I've been involved in working with your team to try to get post offices reestablished, and your team on the ground does good work. But the starting wage for a rural postmaster is $18.44 an hour. The rent that you pay, the stipend, which covers rent, it covers snow removal, it covers insurance, all of these things, $1,357 a year. Is the fact that Canada Post offers such poor compensation to rural postmasters part of the problem when it comes to recruiting and replacing postmasters? Is that what's driving this disturbing trend of rural post offices closing?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. It's an important question. Again, we want to remain in rural and remote Canada. We do not want it to be left behind. So it's our goal to replace every single one of them. But yeah, we shared the salary ranges and so on, and it goes as high as 30, depending on the size of the community and the volumes and so on. But it's worked. It's worked, and I'm not saying it's perfect, and at some point maybe.
But it's not working because we're seeing post offices closed every single year, and part of the reason they're closing is because Canada Post is not recognizing the importance of those roles with a compensation package that is able to recruit people in rural communities. I don't know many people in rural communities in northern BC that are willing to work for $18.44 an hour. These are federal employees that are handling the mail. Like, how is it possible that and where do you get market rent for $1,357 a year? You know what's happening? Those rural postmasters are taking those jobs because they know how vital the post office is to their communities. And the information we have is that they're paying out of pocket to keep your post offices open. Like, they shouldn't have to have a bake sale to deliver federal services in rural communities across Canada. This is on your watch. How are you allowing this to happen?
I appreciate that. It's a good point. Again, it's worked over time. I think we've been pretty darn successful in replacing them. The world has changed. Canada's changed in the last 30 years. What are we now? 40 million people versus 25 million. It's hard to keep to get and attract and retain people in rural areas. I think we all know that. It's unfortunate. And oftentimes we're the last building standing, so we really want to stay there. We're not trying to get out of it. I'd like to see,
One of the ways you can attract and retain people is by paying them more than minimum wage.
Well,
I would offer that. This challenge, it's been going on for a long time. We've lost 600 post offices since 1994. Every year, the minister sends the person in your role a letter of expectation. Has a minister ever expressed concern about the loss of rural post offices in a letter of expectation? Specifically expressed concern?
I believe it's been mentioned. I can't, don't have them all top of mind, but I believe in the mandate letters, it's been talked about in terms of rural post offices. Absolutely. And it's important to me. So it didn't bother me that it was in there. I support it. By the way, this is all in negotiations right now with the Postmasters Union, the CPAA. So I really can't be inappropriate for me to talk any further about it because those discussions are active as we're talking here. But we're concerned about this. So we're not, as I said, we want to fill these positions.
So the post office in Dease Lake in northern BC, very small community, was closed. Canada Post contracted out the services to the band. And the band is now having to subsidize the operation of the post office to the tune of about $30,000 per year. They want to give that service back to Canada Post. They want Canada Post to reopen the Canada Post post office in that community. Are you willing to do that?
Well, again, I'll just say that this service is very important to us. Rural, remote, northern. We're sending today 300 charter airplanes into the north every week to service the remote and rural post offices. We're so proud of that, but I can tell you we're probably losing money on every bit of that. But it's the right thing to do, the right thing for Canadians, and we're proud to do it.
Thank you very
So
much.
we're
That
committed
is our
to
time,
the.
I'm afraid. Perhaps we can get to it next round. Mrs. Kusi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Edinger, and to you and your team for being here today. Mr. Edinger, in Canada, the theft of mail is an indictable offense under Section 356 of the Criminal Code and carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in jail or a $5,000 fine. I'm sure, as you well know, certainly not an offense to be taken lightly. And I am someone who has been a victim of mail theft before, so I have a significant appreciation for how deeply this can affect a Canadian. I had portraits that I was waiting for taken from my mailbox at one point in time. So this is not a small crime, nor is it taken lightly under the criminal code. So therefore, do you think that $500 is a significant enough penalty for a member of parliament who has admitted to stealing mail from Canadians?
Well, I think let me just say this: the sanctity and the security of the mail is critical to us. In fact, we have a whole department of security that reports to Manon Fortin that is engaged on a 24/7 basis. We have a control center here in Ottawa. We have eyes on all of our facilities across Canada, and mail theft and stealing CMBs, community mailboxes, sorry, and others continues to be a problem. So we're very concerned about that. We're watching and dealing with that closely. Whether $500 is appropriate, I think, is up to politicians to decide. Really, it's not my decision, but it is. The way we look at the mail is just that it's critical, and we do everything we can to protect it from being stolen. But there are cases where that happens. We work closely also with the RCMP and other law enforcement agencies, and we have good contacts with them. So we're integrated really with them when things are happening. They help us, we help them, and so on. So, but in terms of the 500, I won't comment on that. I don't think it's my purview.
So I'm very glad to hear of the security measures that you are taking in an effort to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But we do have another election coming up within 18 months. Are you concerned that this might occur again, given that it has occurred in the most recent election? Does that concern you? And do you think it might be a possibility?
Well, of course, anything's possible. But while I'm extremely focused, and as a team and our security team are focused on this to ensure that it doesn't become a problem, and we do have issues, I get a nightly report on across the country what security issues have occurred the night before, and there are issues there. But I believe we have it under control. I don't think it's at a level that will threaten, well, it won't threaten an election. There is no issue in that regard from my standpoint and everything I'm seeing. And it's never been an issue that internally has been raised to us, as an extreme situation. It's under control. We have a good team. A lot of the team are ex-RCMP or ex-military, and that's one of the reasons why we have such good communications with those law enforcement groups.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Of course, as Conservatives, we're always very concerned about the good use of taxpayers' dollars and are always interested as to where their money goes. I'm seeing in a response from the appearance of your last colleague that there are 408 employees currently at Canada Post who are classified as executives. Could you please share with the committee the total number of executives out of those 408 who earned bonuses this last year, please?
Well, we have let me just say this. Let me put it in context first and foremost. Our payroll annually is $4 billion with a B. That's just salary and wages. We also have another billion, I'm rounding here, in benefits, so a total of $5 billion. So it's $10 million a day. It is huge. And we do have a bonus program. It's called CTI. And it was developed back in, I think, 2010, 2011. And it's for all employees. And it's never paid out a dime in its history because our financials prevented that.
Thanks. That is our time.
Thank you. Thank you
Mr.
very
Sousa,
much.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Edinger, for being here today. You spoke earlier about the excitement of going to an unveiling of a stamp. In 2003, I did attend one of the unveilings of your very first mail carrier for Canada, Pedro de Silva. In 1693, he was the first in New France to deliver mail from Quebec City to Montreal, and he was celebrated. He's actually on a plaque in your office in Montreal outside. And it was unveiled in the 50th anniversary of the Portuguese when they first came to Canada through an arranged agreement with Canada and Portugal in 1953, Pier 21 in Halifax. My dad was on that very first boat. And so for us, the community was very, very excited about this anniversary stamp, as well as acknowledging this individual as having been a Portuguese immigrant back in 1693 to deliver mail. So thank you for that. And thank you for the acknowledgement for the community. Public's PSPC, an official, came to this committee back in April 8, 2024, and talked about the similarities of the challenges Canada's facing, as is Australia. And the response was that we need to be more creative. You spoke about the 5 recommendations you've made. One of them is to refresh the regulatory approval systems. And I would be interested in knowing more specifically what the regulatory changes you would propose in doing. And can you discuss the Australian model and how it's affected their services in rural communities?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. I happen to know the Australia Post CEO very well. In fact, he came in by Zoom at our latest board strategy session in Montreal to share some of his learnings with us. And I'll just say that they've been able to, in their country, get a little more flexibility around their operating model, their delivery model. Flexibility, I'd say if there's one key word that I want to leave you all with today, it's flexibility. But let me just say this, our operating model was built back in the day, really in the last century. That sounds a little dramatic, but it was built for a paper-based economy, almost pre-internet, and that is holding us back. And so I would say right now, and forgive me for this terrible analogy, but we are driving a 1967 Chevy in a Formula One race. That's where we are right now, but we're tenacious and we got lots of new parts in the car, but it's a tough one. We need more flexibility to compete. We need more flexibility in how we deliver, weekend delivery, evenings, next day. We need flexibility in our regulatory structure to be able to respond quicker. Flexibility in pricing, which can help us with some of the financing issues that we've had. And flexibility to invest and improve service, invest more in our people, invest more in safety. So, we've got to continue to modernize Canada Post. It's a wonderful organization that is a platform for change across Canada. People care about it. We know that. And we're in a fight, a dog fight for every parcel out there right now. And we're up against some of the best competitors in the world. I don't have to name them, but they're global icons, both shippers and in terms of e-commerce. So the flexibility we need is along those lines, but it's basically modernizing Canada Post, and I believe we can do it. I think we got the talent, the tenacity, the people to do it.
Can you explain the rural definition, the moratorium? Should it be updated? I mean, obviously that's the biggest challenge that's facing in the urban centers. Yeah, we're okay. I mean, we have a lot of competition, but you have a lot of concentrated population to make it worth your while.
Yeah.
So explain to me what it is how do we stay true, in essence, to the intended purpose of the rural definition, the moratorium, and what is it that we're going to do to make
Yeah.
it better?
Great question, a really important question. So the moratorium, as you know, has been in place for 30 years, since 1994. A lot has changed, as I mentioned earlier, in Canada. I won't repeat that. But many of the post offices in that moratorium, the list was created by the government at the time, not Canada Post. And a lot of those that were rural at the time are now very much in urban areas. And I'll just pick a couple. Stittsville outside of Ottawa was very rural, is very suburban now. Richmond Hill, Milton. These areas were rural at the time. They're sure not rural anymore. So the moratorium is protecting those post offices, which typically have another service, franchise service nearby within a couple kilometers. So there's quite a few of those in Canada now. So my concern around that is that, that may be stopping us from getting the right resources out to the rural areas where we need it even more. Because you're well served in the urban areas, and unfortunately well served by our competition, who is essentially cherry picking the top 7 cities in Canada. They basically stay in that lane within 200 miles from the US border, the top 7 cities, and don't really, we actually deliver some of their product north. And we go north. We go everywhere every day. So
I'm sorry, Mr.
we're getting cherry
we're
picked
past our time. I have to
death.
cut you off. It was an interesting answer. And Mr. Sousa, I appreciate your opening comment. It's interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Mrs. Vignola, but before we start, colleagues, if you could just watch the clock and try and get your question out with the appropriate time for Mr. Edinger to answer. Thanks very much.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will do so. My colleague earlier spoke briefly about Australia, which is a country, well, it's a continent, of course, in and of itself. And it has a lot of rural areas, rural communities. When you were talking earlier about international examples, there was Australia, of course, but there is also the UK. What are the conclusions or maybe linkages that we could make between us and Australia? And can we learn from their successes? And can we avoid their errors?
Yeah, excellent question. Australia, as I said, and to Mr. Sousa's question, I didn't fully answer it. I'm talking to the CEO of Australia continuously. In fact, I'm going to be seeing him in a few weeks, and we joke that we're very similar countries. We have snow, they have sand. Otherwise, we have a lot of similarities. But also we have a lot of empty space too. Again, the whole density, the population density in Australia is actually lower than Canada. We're 2 of the lowest in the world for population density. They're 3 people per kilometer. We're 4 per square kilometer. So we have the same challenges. So it really, and if you look at most of the G7 countries, and again, I meet with them continuously, they're all struggling with the very same issues. We compare notes, we're talking about all these things. So, one of the things in Australia is they've been able to use electric vehicles quite well in that marketplace. They've been able to develop a pricing structure with their government that works quite well to generate funding so that they can have the funding to turn around the company. And so that's worked well. IT, I was on the phone, honestly, last night with Australia on IT in terms of, because IT is really behind the scenes, a really big factor on e-commerce. We're connected to every retailer in Canada. So if that isn't right, the shipment doesn't happen, there are problems with the customer. So it's the behind the scenes hero in all of this. And they were asking us for our learnings on some of the changes we've made to bring IT in-house, to get world-class IT, to get it right in close with our business units to make sure we're working together. So we're helping each other
Thank you
all the time.
very much, sir. Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ettinger, you mentioned I believe you called them multinational e-commerce giants that are eating Canada Post's lunch in the big urban areas, and that you deliver their stuff to the north, to rural communities, to remote communities. Now, what's happening in the communities I represent is that people are trying to order things online because there are very limited retail opportunities in communities of 100 people. And they are getting gouged for shipping costs to rural places. So these global multinational e-commerce giants they're getting a deal. You're giving them a bulk deal because they ship so much stuff with you. And then they're marking the products up to the point where the shipping can cost more than the product. People on Haida Gwaii are having to spend, $150 to get a small order from an office supply company. This is like absolutely wrong. And I'm not suggesting that this is the doing of Canada Post, but they're using your postal codes to determine which communities to gouge. How do we stop this? What's the role of the federal government in stepping in and saying, you know what, it's absolutely unacceptable that you're forcing rural residents in remote communities, residents in Canada's north to pay through the nose for a service that our government is providing using a crown corporation funded by taxpayer dollars. How do we address this?
Excellent question. I'll just say that, again, from our standpoint, the focus is on service. And we've recently, just as one example, working with Indigenous communities as well, we've upgraded something like 45 post offices in the last year or so. We've built 4 new community hubs on First Nations land. I'll come to it.
Okay.
And
2.5 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, I'll be quick.
Okay.
And we just opened a brand new post office in Iqaluit, the number 2 post office, all about service.
But none of that addresses the problem I just mentioned.
Right. And so I think that's the purview of the government to figure out I'd certainly be happy to provide input on that. Our job is to serve the North, serve remote, serve it the best way we can. And as I said earlier, charter flights at our cost, which we should be doing, to the North to make sure they have these products. They don't have a lot of choice, and that's concerning to me. It's high cost, but that's outside of my bailiwick, in my opinion. I think government should look at that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genuas, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And just to sort of clarify the structure that you operate under, right? So you're the CEO of Canada Post, which means that you exercise a lot of authority over operations, but you're ultimately constrained by policy that's put in place by the government. You've talked in general terms about modernization. I'd like to challenge you to be as specific as possible. Let's imagine a world in which you didn't have the kinds of constraints that you have as a result of working within a crown corporation, or that you could actually do whatever you thought best to restructure the company. Could you tell us specifically, like what kinds of more innovative and even radical measures you would undertake if you didn't have those constraints along the lines of modernization?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. Again, I'll go back to what I talked about earlier. The market has changed so much. Expectations of Canadians and customers have changed so much. Even coming out of COVID, with all these new upstarts, it's changed the game completely. So they are much more flexible than we are. They're 24/7. I got a delivery on my street, not for me, on Easter Sunday, Labor Day Monday. These players, which are low cost, non-union players, are just much more flexible than us. So I would, again, come back to the word. I'm sorry, but the word is flexibility. We need more flexibility on how we deliver. All of our competition is doing weekend delivery. Right now, we're the only ones that aren't. That has to change. We're talking to our bargaining agents about that right now, and that's those negotiations are underway, so I can't talk about that any further. But
just for that point specifically, how would weekend delivery reduce your costs? It would seem on the face of it that would increase your costs.
It'll grow revenue.
Okay.
A weekend right now is not huge, but it's going to be. It's become the norm. If you remember when we opened Sunday shopping many years ago.
Would that involve charging more for weekend delivery then, or would it involve the same?
Not necessarily, but when you're dealing with customers,
Yeah.
who it's so important that their end consumer gets that product quickly, even if it's on Saturday morning or Sunday night. So they
so people
won't
would be
work
more
with
likely
us.
to work with you as
Thank
opposed
you.
to others.
Thank you. That's it. You've got to be in that game. You got to be competitive. You got to be flexible.
Okay.
And yeah.
What else? What other kinds of radical changes would you consider?
Well, look, there's so many innovative things. We look and continue to look at all the things that are happening around the world. Parcel lockers. We're adding technology right now to the community mailboxes to let people know when there's something in there, so you don't have to drive up and check and hope there's something there. So there's a lot of technology that we can bring to the table that can change the game for us in terms of better efficiency, better customer engagement, all those things. So there's so many possibilities. I'd say pricing as well. We need a pricing structure model that enables us to get reasonable pricing based on where inflation is on an annual basis, so we don't have to go through that whole process. Other countries are now doing that. They're setting up models whereby you work through to a calculation each year based on inflation and other costs. The United States, for example, which is really new, they now get 2 opportunities for price increases every year, and they were notoriously low price stamps, lowest in the world. They're about to go right past us pretty quickly, and they're using that as a way to turn around their company in the United States, as one example.
Mm-hmm. And for making these changes, the process then, taking you out of that imaginary world where you get to make all these decisions yourself. Are you bringing these kinds of ideas to the government? What kind of response are they giving you on the weekend delivery piece, on the price piece?
Well, weekend delivery is something we have to work out with our bargaining agents. So, but we have constant conversations with the department, PSPC. I'm talking to the minister on a regular basis, his deputy minister. So the communication lines are very good, but we have not been able to align on all the right solutions. But we know I'm not saying we're perfect, or we may have missed a couple of things, but we know what's going on around the world and we know what's working.
Yeah, just in terms of aligning, I mean, I understand that the minister may not agree with you on certain particulars, and obviously that's the minister's prerogative. It's the minister's responsible ultimately to the people of Canada for the decisions that are made. But it seems like the lack of approval for the strategic plan going back years and years. It seems like there's a problem of being able to make a decision on any kind of direction from the minister. How do you explain that, the lack of approval on a strategic plan, that seeming ongoing misalignment, the failure to kind of identify solutions between Canada Post and the political decision makers?
Yeah, thank you.
I am sorry to interrupt, but there's no time left for an answer, but perhaps the next round for the Conservatives, you can take time.
Just
then.
hold on to
Baines,
that.
Go
And
ahead.
you can answer my next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Edinger, Madam Fortin, and Madam El-Haj joining us today. I'd also like to echo my colleagues in recognizing our hardworking postal workers who serve our communities across Canada. And in fact, a childhood friend of mine who's nearing his 25 years of service, Paul Baya, is a beloved member of our community in Richmond, British Columbia. And he's coached over 3,000 kids in youth soccer, and even the dogs love him. So he's and
well.
and I also want on the issue of the stamps, I want to share a really proud moment for the Sikh Canadian community. The stamp was made to celebrate the contributions of the community in 1999, and it was a very proud moment for the community. So thank you again for recognizing that. My question is around the greening government strategy. The approach to meeting or exceeding national climate objectives in its own operations, reducing the climate environmental impact of federal government operations, supporting the sustainability goals, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, resilience of assets, services, activities through climate adaptation. So as part of this strategy in its operations, to be net zero by 2050,
yes,
has Canada Post taken any measures to reduce its emissions and improve the sustainability of its organization? If you can talk a little
Yes.
bit about that.
Thank you for that question. Another great question. Yeah, we've taken it extremely seriously. It's been in our mandate letters, and we've embraced it as an organization. It's an important part of our brand. And I'd say we've made a good progress, but we're on a journey that is a long journey, so we're nowhere near where we need to be. I'll say a couple points of evidence of that are the Albert Jackson Processing Center, which is very much a green certified building for its size in Canada. It's a huge facility, but it has solar panels on the roof. It has electric charging stations, et cetera, et cetera. We scorecard and monitor and are working on a number of programs around our environmental performance. We brought down our scope 1 and 2 GHG emissions by 17% last year. So we have actual numbers, and it's on my scorecard in terms of progress. We launched a new product last year called carbon neutral shipping. And it's basically ground shipping, which still emits carbon, but it's a lot less than other alternatives. So we're very pleased with those, and we've been recognized by a number of bodies for our actions, not just our talk, our actions in that regard in terms of the environment. And as I said, it's an important part of our brand, something we're committed to, but at the same time, we got to get the financials, and the financials concern me deeply, and we got to bring them into line, and we intend to. But on the ESG environmental side, we're pleased with where we are.
Is that impacting, say, the fleet in any way?
Yeah, thank you. We have one of the largest fleets, if not the largest in Canada. People may not realize that, about 14,000 vehicles. We've committed to converting those to electric by 2040. And we've started to phase them in a small way. We got a long ways to go, but we're very pleased with that so far. But we're learning a lot on that. The big thing with electric vehicles is the infrastructure. You have to get the infrastructure in properly, and there's a lot of learning there. We're learning as we're going, but we're very committed to that. Yes.
Thank you for that. And with respect to the rural and remote communities, and the Indigenous communities who we know often live in a lot of these rural communities, the need to ensure access and the range. Canada Post recognizes this obligation as part of its commitment. Can you explain how Canada Post approaches reconciliation?
Yeah.
About 25 seconds, please.
Oh, God. We launched a 5-year strategy in 2022. We're on Indigenous reconciliation. We were the first Crown at the time to do that. As I said, we've already improved 45 Indigenous post offices on their communities, on their First Nations. We got another 25 planned for this year. We have a 5% target on procurement. We're at 4%. We actually have an employee percentage target. We're at 3.3% right now in our organization. We've built 4 community hubs on First Nations land in the last couple of years. Member 2 in Nova Scotia, High Prairie in Alberta, Fort Capel in Saskatchewan, and Little Current, which is Manitoulin Island in Ontario. Very pleased with those. And we're working hard on that. And by the way, we've opened 6 new full-service post offices in rural locations since 2022.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Block, please.
That always catches me by surprise. I'm not sure why. Mr. Ettinger, we have seen recent reports in the media that Canada Post is going to have a role in the gun buyback program through the shipping of guns. Now, it's my understanding that Canada Post had previously done a risk assessment of being involved in the gun buyback program, and it was found that there were too many risks for Canada Post to be involved in it. Is Canada Post being pressured to participate in this program, or was there another risk assessment conducted that found there were not as many risks as previously thought?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll say that, and this is unequivocal, employee safety is our top priority. And for me, it's my clear responsibility to keep our employees safe and the public safe, because post offices are a public location. So we did an internal safety assessment. We were not comfortable with the process that was being proposed in ongoing discussions over the last few months. And so our position is that we're the elevated risk, we're just not comfortable with. We're not set up. Our buildings are not set up with security, with proper storage. The buildings aren't that secure overall the way I'd like them to be. This is not in our expertise. This should be best left to those that know how to handle guns, know how to dismantle them, know how to manage them so no one gets hurt. It is not something we're comfortable with at all.
Thank you. I'm sure you have communicated that back to those who may be suggesting that you should be. What has the response been so far to that, to the assessment that you yourselves have conducted and the answer that you've come up with?
Well, our position stays the same, but I know there are discussions going on in terms of other alternatives that might make sense. I've always, on any issue, taken an open-minded approach because I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I'll get the right team on it, the right experts that can try to figure it out. So, the discussions continue, but our position is clear based on the approach that was being considered. We're just not comfortable from the elevated risk assessment of that. I would not live with myself if somebody got hurt. So it's almost that simple.
Thank you very much. According to projections prepared for Canada Post by Ernst & Young, Canada Post was projected to have losses of $721 million in 2026. Yet Canada Post has already reported a full year net loss of $748 million in 2023. So Canada Post has already surpassed loss projections 3 years out, and you've projected that early. How is this sustainable?
It's not. We have to undergo substantial change. The business model, as I said earlier, but I'll take a slightly different angle, has outlived its useful life. I think it worked at the time when it was a letter mail monopoly. The price of letters covered the cost of delivery at that time. And we're able to ride the early wave of e-commerce where we were the only game in town. And, we had excess space at the time. So the early days of e-commerce, we were able to incorporate those volumes. But through COVID, where things changed a lot and with new competition coming in, that business is under attack. Every bit of it. It is a fight. I'm not being dramatic by saying that. So our business model needs to be updated. It is done, finished, and it probably has been for 10 years. And so for us to be competitive, and I'm confident we can be, this is not rocket science in a lot of ways, but you got to have the flexibility to be able to do some of the things I talked about earlier. And in order to basically compete head on with these companies who are great strategists and have done a lot of great things. But we need that flexibility in how we deliver, how we price, how we make decisions, how we operate, how we invest, how we support our people right down the line.
Thanks very much, Mr. Shawari.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Edinger. A number of times in your responses and even in your opening remarks, you talked about that the business model has changed, and you just reconfirmed that it is not sustainable and it needs to take a different approach. And you've highlighted the fact that
there's a misalignment.
Canada Post can compete, but not within the current model. Therefore, we need a different model. And you put flexibility at the heart of the new model. And to the best of my recollection and taking notes, you talked about You need a different model of competition or flexibility in competition. You need flexibility in pricing. You need flexibility in investment. And you talked about flexibility in delivery. And you gave an example of the delivery, talking about evening, weekends, and I'm sure you have looked into an alternative delivery model, which is around drones and around central boxes and around, especially in the urban areas such as Richmond Hill. By the way, thanks a lot for shout out to Richmond Hill. In central in urban area like that, that model could work very well. Can you give us an example of the investment, the flexibility in the investment, the flexibility in pricing that will be able to help you? Because it looks like with the 5 different recommendations that you have and what you have in mind, all you need is a green light to be able to do this. And for green light, you need partnership. As far as delivery is concerned, you need investment and you need partnership with the postmaster. But can you talk about the investment and you talk about the flexibility you need for pricing?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Bottom line is customers' expectations have changed a lot through COVID. They basically want 3 things right now. They want fast, they want free, and they want flexible. So, the competitors out there have set the bar pretty high. People's expectations are next day delivery, not so much same day, but next day delivery. So that's the ball game we're competing in right now. Our structure isn't really set up for that. Again, when I talk about weekend delivery, it's something we have to negotiate with our bargaining units, and we're doing that right now. The cost of weekend delivery is prohibitive for us through overtime. Quite a large number in order to do that, or we would have done it already. That's one example. Pricing, and in terms of pricing, if you look at other markets around the world, both the UK, Australia, France, even the United States, have been able to work out a pricing approach that is, again, based on a calculation that incorporates inflation, your costs, what else is going on in the economy and the market, and so on. And it's right now we've had 2 price increases in the last decade, and we've had none in the last 4 years. So we need that funding in order to support the turnaround strategy that we're trying to execute with the rest of the organization. So those things, and that gets into investments in electric vehicles or investments in centralized mailboxes. You raised that, and by the way, it's the government's clear direction to keep door-to-door delivery where it is today and not expand community mailboxes. We certainly abide by that. We respect that strongly. But the experience on CMBs has actually been quite good over time in terms of they're secure, they're safe, they're convenient, and they're efficient for the organization.
Yeah, thank you. I got about 45 seconds. I want to go back to the pricing. And you're saying there's only 2 prices increase. And when you're talking about the flexibility of pricing, are you talking about something that's out of your control, out of Canada Post control? It's dictated. Therefore, you can't looking into if you want the next day delivery, it's going to be X amount of dollar. 2 days delivery, if you want over the weekend delivery, is going to be that, and you cannot do that.
We can price our parcels in e-commerce accordingly. It's a competitive market, and we can. What I'm referring to there is letter mail rate increases, which are controlled by government, by GIC approval. Yes.
That's my time.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you, Chair. A few days ago, we learned, and I'm just going to ask my questions seriatim and quickly because I only have 2.5 minutes. We learned that there was a fraud around the small loans program. That fraud, I want to know, was it internal, external, the amount of the fraud? And how can Canada Post recover the sums of monies involved? Second question, you said that Canada Post needs more flexibility and also you have to compete with non-unionized parcel delivery services. What can Canada Post do? Is it likely that it can compete, or do you see a union as a way of assuring greater flexibility? What exactly is the present situation between Canada Post and the unions in terms of profitability?
So thank you for those. There's a couple in there. One is you mentioned a fraud with a bank program. Could I ask which program was that, just so I can be clear in my answer?
It was the sandbox program, the sandbox program for micro loans. It was a few months ago.
About 30 seconds, so perhaps you can answer one and respond in writing to the other question.
Yeah, I'll answer the first question, and we'll get back to you on the other. We launched a program in late 2022 with the Toronto Dominion Bank as our partner. We piloted it and then we launched it nationally. Their security folks were very good and picked up on some irregularities very, very quickly. We suspended it immediately and did a full review and decided as partners not to go forward with the program. But there were a lot of learnings from that, and we're committed to developing more financial services for rural and remote areas, most importantly, going forward.
Thanks very much. Ms. Matheson, welcome to OGO. I'm afraid you only have 2.5 minutes, but please go ahead.
I'll see what I can do, Mr. Chair. So as I understand it, and I am new to this conversation, not so new, I guess, to the overall, that Canada Post is going to be proposing the reduction potentially to 3 days a week postal delivery. Now, as I understand it, the union CUPW is actually arguing that instead of looking to that to save money, you consistently talked about that current past business model not working, the flexibility that you need, the expansion, going in an entirely different direction would be the expansion, expanding out and working with the union to ensure that the program that they've had on the books for so long, delivering community power, would look at that expansion, showing the need of Canada Post in terms of postal banking, elder check-ins, community hubs, those charging stations, all of those things. So is that part of the negotiations that you're in now in terms of that change that you're looking to make?
Thank you. Some good questions there. Well, the first thing to stress is we are in active negotiations with CUPW right now, so I can't say too much, but I will say this. Alternative day delivery is not on the table with them. It's not something we're looking at. We understand the program. It actually, at first glance, when you look at it, you say, well, why wouldn't it be reasonable to deliver 2 days a week or 3 days a week? The issue is our network is a collapsed network that carries parcels, direct mail, and letters together. So think about the letter carrier. Even if we only delivered letter every second day, letters, we still have to go through the route, because to be competitive in e-commerce and parcels, we have to be there every day. In fact, the answer to this now, and it does dovetail with what you said, is we need 7-day delivery. That's what we need. We don't need fewer days, but it's mainly to compete on parcels, because that's where that market is.
So it is my understanding that it is my understanding that sorry, mic issues. It is my understanding that the union is entirely open to that suggestion and they're willing to work with you on that. So again, in terms of that expansion, are you fully looking at expansion? I mean, even food delivery, as we've seen, and that competition that you're talking about from those smaller businesses, it would help with that.
Yeah,
I'm
and
sorry, I have to interrupt, but we haven't left any time for an answer, I'm afraid, but perhaps
I have mic issues.
Sorry. But perhaps you get back to the committee in
Yes.
writing for some of the issues brought forward.
Absolutely.
And actually, while we're talking about that, the committee has passed a motion that requests everything back within 21 days
Yes.
for such information. We'll go to Mrs. Kusi, and then we'll finish this round again with Ms. Atwin.
Much appreciated. Mr. Ettinger, I'm sure that Canada Post believes in the importance of privacy for Canadians. And of course, as you have mentioned several times over, you are here to serve Canadians. And I'm sure you want to responsibly act on your mandate. But I'm just concerned about your decision to fulfill your mandate in taking the personal information of Canadians without their informed consent and selling it to third parties. What words can you please provide Canadians with to ensure them that you are ethically fulfilling your mandate while disagreeing with the recommendations set out by independent officers of Parliament, please?
Yes. Thank you for that question. That's an important question. So I'll start off by saying the trust of Canadians when it comes to privacy is second to none. We take that very seriously. We announced some changes to our smart mail marketing program. I guess it was the end of February, following a concern, one complaint that came through the Privacy Commissioner. And we've made a number of changes related to that are already effective. One is no longer offering aggregated online shopping trends at the postal level for retailers to review. We've discontinued using data from publicly available directories combined with our own operational data to validate an incomplete address. And in that case, we've stopped doing that, but we're only trying to make the service better. And we're working hard to increase the transparency and awareness of our direct mail marketing program so that people know how to opt out of it if they want to opt out. And we're doing that through online, social media, in our post offices, and so on. So we continue to work with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. We have a good ongoing dialogue with him and his team, and we respect the Privacy Act to the nth degree, and will continue to respect it going forward.
Thank you very much for that response. My next question, Mr. Ettinger, is does Canada Post keep track as to who they are selling Canadians' private information to?
Well, as I said, we treat data in a very, very careful and protected way. It's in our database, which is protected within our four walls. And essentially, we help businesses ensure that their lists are up to date and accurate for delivery. But we very, very much protect and adhere to the Privacy Act as we're going through that process. And again, we've made a number of changes based on the review of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner that I'm told, and I cannot speak for them, but I'm told that we have reached an area where we're comfortable that we've made the changes that we need to make to deal with that very important issue.
So then I'm hopeful that this information guarantees that this information is not going to bad actors to target Canadians.
No.
Excellent. And can you guarantee that this information is not being sold to other countries who could
No.
use this information to interfere in Canada's democracy?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. I'm very happy to hear that. Mr. Chair, with the time I have left, I'd like to put a motion on notice, please. Okay, thank you. That the committee report to the House that it condemns the stealing of mail. That's the motion. Thank you. Correct. Yeah, I'm putting it on notice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ettinger. Thank you, team.
Go to Ms. Atwin, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to close out our discussion this afternoon or this evening. I guess it's quite late now. So thank you so much for being here and answering our questions. I really want to circle back to the community hub pilots that are happening. I was only aware of 2 locations, so really excited to hear that it's now 4. Specifically, of course, I'm familiar with the member two, Nova Scotia one. It's close to my neck of the woods in New
Yeah.
Brunswick. And it offers an expanded range of products and services, things like parcel lockers, which you mentioned,
Yep.
Self-serve, contactless induction of items to be mailed, access to financial services, the Canada Post My Money loan, remittance services, foreign currency exchange, check cashing, ATMs, also small business support. So there's a mention of rentable meeting rooms, public wireless internet access, and access to computers. So this is remarkable to me, especially at a time when we're talking about, there are other closures that we're seeing, or other rural communities that are not seeing these kinds of investments, or this kind of, I think, energy put into modernizing or meeting the needs of a community. And so I'm just curious, what's the process? How did this happen, and how can we ensure that this expands?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, you're right. Member two is probably the closest one to you. You're in Fredericton, I believe. Great city, by the way. And we're so proud of those four. As I mentioned, member two, High Prairie, Alberta, Fort Capel, Saskatchewan, and Little Current, which is Manitoulin Island. The key thing on those is we engaged the local First Nations community right at the beginning of the project. And we wanted them to design the post offices with their culture in mind, with their artifacts, with their artwork, with their, color palettes and so on. And you missed one thing on the list, though. They have a podcast center in member two. So the whole idea behind that is to make them more relevant in like a community gathering spot, where you got Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi, you got resources for small businesses. It's really to help those small businesses connect with one another, network with one another. I was there with Chief Terry Paul when we opened member two. He was so happy about it. So was I. And we're monitoring those results, and we're learning from them, and we're trying to adjust. And Iqaluit is another example of that, where part of the intent for Iqaluit was for small business there too, so that they can, when you're starting a small business, it's a lonely venture. You may know that. And they need all the help they can get. So we can put them in touch with BDC, we can put them in touch with lawyers, whatever they need. We want to be the resource that really adds value. And that's our vision for the post office of the future, that it's got more stickiness. We're adding more value for these entrepreneurs.
And are there additional costs incurred by the community for these extra services? Or also, are there new
No.
builds, or these existing kind of
These they're a little bit of both, but member two, for example, was a new build. I think Manitoulin was a new build. Iqaluit is a new build. The others were refurbishment, but you wouldn't know it. I mean, it's brand new looking and very different than what it was before. But again, the idea is selfishly for us to build loyalty with those small businesses. Sometimes those small businesses turn into big businesses, and we want to be part of that journey. We want to help them. And we have a program called Solutions for Small Business. We have 500,000 members that are all small businesses. So we're trying to tap into those folks and connect to the community hubs.
Excellent. And we also mentioned a little bit about, how Canada Post is looking at, carbon offsets, for example, and kind of really taking responsibility for the climate crisis. And I'm sure, there's also, the impending impacts that we're already dealing with. And so I'm looking at some of the issues around, service interruptions that occurred last year because of floods or forest fires, how long they lasted, the costs that were associated with this. We also noticed that, of course, in Lytton, BC, that it disrupted service. So what kind of mitigation plans are in place as far as, preventative measures or being prepared for these kinds of emergencies?
Wonderful question. Unfortunately, it's but really good question, but I'll let Manal answer that. That group and her operations team are the ones on the ground that deal with that.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for the question. So being in thousands of communities across Canada means that we're exposed to what the community is exposed as well. And that can come through the form of extreme weather events. It could be a wildfire and other. And we have become really good at finding, well, first keeping our employees safe, and then being as quick as possible to provide contingencies for the Canadians who live in those communities to still be able to receive their mail and to restore service as quickly as possible.
That's my time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Alwyn. Right on time. What is this? Thank you very much. Mr. Editor, pleasure to have you with us for the first time. but before you pack up, I just have a couple quick things, if you don't mind. First of all, I'm glad Mrs. Block, and I appreciate that you've brought up so much about the rapid change that's been happening over the years. I was part of this study 8 years ago, and it's funny, Ernst & Young with their forecast was quite loudly denounced as scaremongering, and it turns out they under forecasted the loss. So I'm glad you were able to address it. If you could just get back to the committee, if you could provide to us how many of your vehicles are stolen every year. And then it came up the last study, they issued I think it's the Universal Postal Union Agreement about Canada Post or Canada subsidizing other countries. If you're able to get back to us, I understand it was an issue that we were actually subsidizing mail to China. But if you could get back to us on those numbers. And just very briefly, I wanted to echo some of the comments brought forward, people thanking their various folks within Canada Post. There's a chap in Alberta, Donald Cooper, who's been helping us for years. He's Calgary-based, but apart from that, he's a phenomenal gentleman. I wanted to pass on our thanks from Edmonton to Mr. Cooper through you. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to dismiss you because we're going to get to approving the estimates. Funny enough, the first of which is approving Canada Post's money. So you can stay for that, but no, I don't. I would take $1 million off for that. Thanks. But thank you again. Colleagues, if I can have unanimous consent, please to have all votes referred to this committee for the main estimates, 2024, 2025 to be carried on division. Wonderful. Shall I report the estimates back to the House? Wonderful. On division, so ordered. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate everyone's time and for staying late, and to our clerk and, of course, valued interpreters, and to our analysts and all the support people. Thank you for sticking around so much. We're adjourned.